Chapter 521. Your Majesty? Suddenly, someone shouted from outside the forest. It was the commander of the Imperial Guards. Feng Yunyan's intense movements suddenly stopped. He gasped for breath and stopped his bold movements. He did not expect her to take the initiative to this extent. Wei Wei Bai's breathing was also unstable. Her face was red and her eyes were misty. Feng Yunyan saw him like this and his throat tightened. The two of them were speechless. Feng Yunyan was even a little nervous. Would she think that he was too bold? Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and put her hand on his shoulder. She raised her head and kissed his lips that were still warm. A trace of astonishment flashed in his eyes. Wei Wei Bai left him with a smile in her eyes. I'm very fair. You do it once, I do it once. Feng Yunyan's heart felt like it was being brushed by a cool breeze and warmed by the sun. The gloomy and evil aura around him melted. Wei Wei Bai held his hand and walked out. She asked someone for a lantern and held it in her hand. She said, "Let's walk back." Feng Yunyan stared at her deeply and said with a smile, "Yes, Your Majesty." It was late at night and snow fell again. Feng Yunyan held an umbrella and she walked under the umbrella with the lantern. The dim yellow light illuminated the woman's face, making it hazy and beautiful. He only felt that his heartbeat was out of his control. It was always a few beats faster. "Your Majesty, what's your favorability towards me?" Bai Weiwei looked up and saw that the man's face was elegant, his eyes were deep, and his voice was soft. For some reason, there was a trace of tenderness. Her expression became even gentler. Not too much, not too little. 99. Feng Yunyan's eyes darkened. 99 was a lot. He should feel satisfied. After all, he needed an emperor to place him in her heart and reach the position of 99. Almost no one could do it. Moreover, she still had the country in her heart. Just as he thought this, he saw Wei Wei Bai lower her head, revealing a snow-white neck. This was more dazzling than the snow. Then he heard her mutter with some annoyance, "How can you say 100? You'll win the country with 100. At that time, I won't be worth anything. You won't want me." Feng Yunyan looked at her in a daze and suddenly remembered the bet. If he made her fall in love with him, then she would give him the country. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. It was unfamiliar, warm, and joyful. Bai Weiwei lowered her head and didn't hear his response. She looked up anxiously. "That, when we get married, I'll be 100 years old. At that time, even if you want to dump me, it won't work." Men had no right to propose a divorce. Feng Yunyan wondered how there could be such a cute person, making the rims of his eyes begin to sting. The pain of the first half of his life could be exchanged for meeting her. He used "Your Majesty, I don't want this country anymore." He suddenly realized that he didn't feel the slightest bit unwilling when he said those words. There wasn't even a sense of sacrifice. There was only a sense of relief. "As long as you keep treating me like this, it's fine." Feng Yunyan pursed his lips. His face was as white as snow, but the smile in his eyes was as intoxicating as the warm sun and gentle breeze. Wei Wei Bai held his hand and couldn't help but use force. She held the lantern and walked forward. The light illuminated the road ahead. Her eyes were gorgeous, and her voice was clear. "Don't worry. No matter how heavy the snow is, I'll block it for you." This sentence was more serious than "you'll be good for a lifetime." It was full of a woman's sense of responsibility. Feng Yunyan smiled slightly, as gentle as jade. He tilted the umbrella over her head, blocking the falling snow. "Your Majesty, let's travel together." He also wanted to block it for her and protect the country for her. Chapter 522. Wei Wei Bai smiled sweetly. "Okay. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 80. After returning, Wei Wei Bai doted on Feng Yunyan even more. When he was tired from reading the memorials, she served him tea. When he dealt with government affairs until late at night, she served him supper. When he needed to quell the rebellion, she handed over all the military authority to him. The system felt that it had been blinded by this adulterous couple. In the past, they had been tortured to death. But now, everything was going so smoothly, and they were torturing the single dog. It felt that it had indigestion. The male lead was too easy to conquer. He could easily increase his favorability to 80 points. What a casual man. It couldn't help but knock Wei Wei Bai. "You handed over all the authority to the male lead. Aren't you afraid that he will suddenly have a change of heart?" Wei Wei Bai was feeding Feng Yunyan pastries. "Yunyan, open your mouth and eat." Feng Yunyan lowered his head and was reviewing the memorials. Without thinking, he opened his mouth and sucked on the pastry on her finger. The temperature of her fingertips was so smooth that he couldn't help but suck on it. Wei Wei Bai's finger trembled and she pulled it back. Although Feng Yunyan had his head lowered, his ears couldn't help but turn red. The two of them looked at each other at the same time and smiled sweetly in tacit understanding. The neglected system, woof, said. The last 20 points are the hardest to increase. You even gave the army away. If anything happens, Wei Wei Bai smiled tenderly and picked up a cup of flower tea. Yunyan, drink some tea. This flower is good for the stomach. Drink more to nourish your stomach. Feng Yunyan looked up again and took a sip of tea. It's sweet. His eyes were gentle as he said with a smile. Wei Wei Bai looked at him affectionately. Not as sweet as you. Feng Yunyan's ears turned red and spread to his face. A faint layer of pink forced him to lower his head to hide it. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 82. System, I've never seen a male lead that was so easy to capture. He was bought over with just a cup of tea. Wei Wei Bai came back to her senses. Did you say anything just now? Wei Wei Bai, didn't you want to have a cold war with me? System, it's in a cold war, but she doesn't care about it, so why should it be cold war? Wei Wei Bai said, it's fine. You can continue the cold war. My Nian Nian and I don't mind at all. After another round of sweet abuse, the system suddenly became haggard. He felt like he had a fake host. Actually, it didn't even have a host. When other hosts saw that the system didn't say anything, they would be worried. Or maybe they should show some concern. His host couldn't wait for it to disappear. The system felt something warm flowing down from its eyes. It was the loneliest system in history. How sad. Outside the palace, a carriage appeared. The curtain of the carriage was pulled aside by a fair and slender hand. The person behind the curtain was partially visible. Her voice was colder than snow. Let Wei Wei Bai come to see me. She said before that if she conquered the country, she would let me marry her. The voice was cold and arrogant. I am willing to accept my loss. She took my country, so I will marry her. Wei Wei Bai, who was grinding ink, suddenly heard the system's voice. Is the love of the past a red rose or mosquito blood? You once promised her the country, a promise that you would never change. But now that things have changed, has your heart ever changed? Side mission, love returns to love, love will never stop. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Please immediately welcome Princess Fengling into the palace and marry her as the Empress. Also, capture her favorability to be above 80. If the mission fails, the host and the system will fall to the ground face first from 10,000 meters in the air. I hope that you will share both blessings and misfortunes, love each other, and be a sweet family. The system and the host, fall your grandpas love each other. You're as deep as the sea, I'll send you to heaven. Why don't you go and be sweet yourself? The https://www.sashu.com/ the full text at https://www.sashu.com/ download text at https://www.sashu.com the at https://msashu.com. Chapter 523. Host, do you accept the side mission? We are the kind-hearted main system, we are the democratic main system. You have 10 seconds to choose, yes or no. 2 bright and big buttons appeared. But Wei Wei Bai could only look at them. These were the system's buttons, she couldn't touch them. Father Tong, quickly rejected. System, Wei Wei Bai also reacted, the reject button was broken, haha. 1 second countdown, 0, default host accepts. The host and the system were silent. Wei Wei Bai was stunned, can't you fix the button? The system smiled bitterly, I fixed it at that time, but there was a small mistake. Originally, it could be used after connecting a line, but in the end, my hand shook and the line was cut, completely scrapping it. Wei Wei Bai, why don't you spend some life points to fix it, or change it? This side mission was simply asking for their lives. The system was silent for a long time, it's a bit expensive. Wei Wei Bai thought of the 100 life points in her hand and suddenly felt very confident, if it's necessary, I can't save. Spend it boldly, how much is it? The system sighed, it's only 1,000,000 life points. Wei Wei Bai, the system and the host looked at the meager 100 life points. Suddenly, they felt that poverty had limited their imagination. Your Majesty, are you tired? The sluggish Bai Weiwei only reacted when she heard his voice. She hurriedly said, I'm not tired, I'll go to the kitchen to see if the chicken soup is ready. Feng Yunyan smiled and said, just let the servants go, you don't have to specially watch. Weiwei Bai hurriedly got up, how can I, of course I have to watch the food you eat, I'll go first. After she finished speaking, she hurriedly walked out. The side mission above her head was, make Princess Fengling enter the palace within 30 minutes, if you fail, you will fall face first from a height of 10,000 meters. Weiwei Bai looked at the side mission above her head and cursed the system in her heart. English, French, Japanese, and Korean greetings to the relatives of the main system. The sight of Wei Wei Bai leaving in a hurry made Feng Yunyan's pen pause. Does your majesty have something to do? Feng Yunyan was extremely sensitive. He thought for a moment and suddenly laughed. Really, it's time for me to change my suspicious personality. He could suspect anyone, but how could he suspect her? Outside the palace, the guards drew their swords one after another. Isn't Phoenix Spirit Princess a remnant of the previous dynasty? Kill him on the spot. Princess Fengling was the heir to the throne of the previous dynasty. Moreover, this princess's talent and beauty were so perfect that no one could find fault with her. If not for Wei Wei Bai's rebellion. She was the well-deserved empress. The woman in the carriage had a hibiscus flower between her eyebrows. Her lips were red without any makeup, and her eyes were as cold as ice. Looks like Wei Wei Bai has already forgotten her promise. Humph, the world is right. There are too many heartless people, and we can't kill all of them. Outside the carriage, the sound of the guards drawing their swords made her face even colder. She had just dropped the curtain and was about to rush out when a familiar voice sounded. All of you, leave. Feng Ling was stunned. A hand reached out from outside and grabbed the curtain to open it. Behind the curtain, an incomparably beautiful face appeared in front of her. Her eyes were calm and clear. When she saw Feng Ling, she frowned. Follow me into the palace. Feng Ling came back to her senses and sneered, You want to enter the palace? I didn't answer. Wei Wei Bai didn't have the time to listen to her. The mission countdown above her head was like a death warrant. She turned around and kicked the driver. She snatched the horsewhip and immediately urged the horse to run into the palace gates. And read the full article at https://www.sashu.com// And read the at https://msashu.com. Chapter 524. The guards all dodged. Her beautiful face was so dazzling under the sun that people couldn't take their eyes off her. Feng Ling, who was sitting behind her, looked at her in a daze. She felt that she was different from before and was no longer fearful of her. There was no feeling of cherishing her. However, this unyielding confidence was even more attractive. Ding, Princess Feng Ling's favorability is at 65. The side mission of entering the palace is complete. Wei Wei Bai's face darkened, she was not happy at all. Because there was still the damned mission of increasing favorability and marrying Princess Feng Ling. What made her want to cry the most was that Feng Ling was a woman. Was this forcing her to be a lesbian? It seemed that men and women could no longer satisfy the main system. Her moral integrity had been fed to the dogs. The system said, Princess Feng Ling's favorability is at 65 because she had a crush on the original owner before, and the original owner also had a crush on her. Then, the two of them refused to bow down and turned into a rebellion. The system explained a lot of love and hate in the previous dynasty. Wei Wei Bai said, Get lost, I don't want to hear it, my ears are rotten. Don't explain to her about the feelings between women, she didn't want to hear it. Thinking about how Feng Ling liked women, she got goosebumps. She didn't discriminate against women and men, as long as she wasn't involved. After stuffing Feng Ling into the cold palace, she didn't even say a word to her and immediately ordered people to guard her. Don't let her go out. If she dares to go out, tie her up. Wei Wei Bai called a group of guards and surrounded the cold palace. If Feng Yunyan saw this, his favorability would probably drop to 0. Feng Ling was the person he hated the most. Feng Ling was furious. Wei Wei Bai, I've already lowered myself to come to your side, what's with your attitude? Wei Wei Bai was even fiercer than her, didn't you see my attitude? If you dare to go out, I'll break your legs. Stay here and don't cause trouble. Goodbye. With that, she ran away with a cold face. She hadn't taken her chicken soup yet. If she was any later, with Feng Yunyan's monstrous sensitivity, it would be strange if he didn't notice. Feng Ling watched her leave heartlessly. She suddenly felt a little uncomfortable. In the past, she was always the one who carefully tried to please her. But now, he was treating her so coldly. Feng Ling's heart ached. Feng Yunyan put the memorial aside and looked at the door absent-mindedly. Is the chicken soup not ready yet? Could it be that she really had something else to do? What was there that he couldn't know? Feng Yunyan looked at the memorial and suddenly couldn't continue reading. Suddenly, there was movement from the other side of the door. It was the sound of hurried footsteps. Feng Yunyan immediately returned to his sitting position. Then, he picked up the memorial and pretended to read it. His uneasy heart finally calmed down. Wei Wei Bai came in with chicken soup and smiled. I've been away for so long. Did you miss me? The chicken soup tastes better when it's stewed for a while. She placed the chicken soup on the table and scooped it into a bowl. Feng Yunyan stood up and quickly took the bowl from her hands. Let me do it, Your Majesty. When he took the bowl from her hands, he suddenly paused for a few seconds, and his expression was obscure. Then, he lowered his head and silently scooped the soup, as if he wanted to hide something. He drank a few mouthfuls. Wei Wei Bai asked with a smile, "Is it good?" Feng Yunyan looked up and stared at her with his beautiful black eyes. "Where else did your majesty go just now?" Wei Wei Bai was extremely calm. "I went to the imperial kitchen. I didn't go anywhere." Feng Yunyan stared at her deeply. She looked back calmly. After a while, Feng Yunyan smiled faintly. "Drink the soup, your majesty." After he finished speaking, he drank a few more mouthfuls before saying softly, "This soup is really delicious." Wei Wei Bai's relaxed voice sounded. "Then I'll drink it too and see how delicious it is." Feng Yunyan couldn't help but smile, but there was a hint of bitterness in his smile. He smelled the fragrance of hibiscus flowers on her body. He had only smelled this fragrance on one person so far. Perhaps it was just a misunderstanding. Perhaps she was just passing by the garden and smelled the flowers. But he knew very well that in the dead of winter, the flowers were all withered. Chapter 525. Wei Wei Bai, I'm not interested in women. System, fall face first from a height of 10,000 meters. Wei Wei Bai tried hard to refuse. It's not good to cheat. How can a person with such high morals like me cheat? System, have you forgotten the plane of the pillow child? Wei Wei Bai was speechless and said, if Feng Yunyan finds out, the favorability points that I've worked so hard to accumulate will be gone. System silently flipped through its memories before confirming, you're so relaxed in this plane that your favorability points are dropping. What's the point of working so hard? Wei Wei Bai, can't I work hard to show off my affection? System was speechless. As a single dog that was being shown off, it felt sad. Ding, Feng Ling's favorability has increased to 60. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. I have my own morals to uphold. Even if my favorability points drop, I won't. Ding, Feng Ling's favorability has increased to 55. Wei Wei Bai, I won't go for a girl. Ding, Feng Ling's favorability has increased to 50. Wei Wei Bai suddenly stood up. Feng Yunyan, who had finished dealing with government affairs and was playing chess with himself, looked up and asked softly, Your Majesty, what's wrong? Wei Wei Bai showed a bright smile. Nothing, I'm going to the kitchen to see if the pineapple cake I want is ready. Feng Yunyan's fingers paused, but his expression did not reveal any clues. It should be ready. The servant will bring it over. Wei Wei Bai, I'll go, I'll be back soon. After saying that, she immediately turned and left. Feng Yunyan watched her leave in a hurry for a while before throwing the chess piece in his hand on the chessboard. The chess pieces fell to the ground with a clatter. He stood up expressionlessly, put his hands behind his back, and walked out step by step. Wei Wei Bai came to the cold palace and saw Feng Ling sitting on a chair with a cup of tea and looking at her with a cold smile. What's wrong? Have you forgotten about your old love now that you have a new one? I heard that you dote on Feng Yunyan so much that you're dizzy. After Feng Ling finished speaking, she realized that the other party was very silent. In the past, when they were together, she had always flattered her. When she was outside the palace and heard that Feng Yunyan was favored, she thought that Feng Yunyan looked very similar to herself and thought that she was just looking for a substitute. Therefore, he wasn't worried at all. But later, she heard that Wei Wei Bai wanted to make Feng Yunyan empress. Only then did she start to feel a little surprised. How could a substitute surpass her? Her empire was taken away by Wei Wei Bai, and she took it away because she didn't give Wei Wei Bai a chance. Tell her directly that it was impossible. Unless she was the emperor, she had no other choice. Later, Wei Wei Bai actually succeeded in her rebellion. At that time, she was furious and started to plan an assassination. She got someone to instigate Feng Yunyan to send herself to death. She didn't expect. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said coldly, I came to see if you're not used to it. I'll leave after that. Feng Ling looked up at her fiercely, only to see that she was wearing an exquisite light green robe and her long hair was simply tied with a hair band. Standing in the sunlight, she was so gorgeous and exquisite that it was suffocating. Wei Wei Bai's appearance had always been unique. She originally thought that she was beautiful enough, but in front of Wei Wei Bai, she was still a little lacking. But now, she realized that the difference was even greater. She was so beautiful that she was stunned. Ding, Feng Ling's favorability has increased to 55. Wei Wei Bai, who didn't do anything, her favorability dropped and rose as if she had a stroke. Only then did Feng Ling come back to her senses. She threw the teacup on the table and a cold light flashed in her eyes. I'm not used to it here. To her, being willing to tell the truth was already lowering her head. She thought that Wei Wei Bai's heart would ache. If you're not used to it, then hold it in. These words were terrifyingly cold. Chapter 526. Feng Ling looked up in shock, only to see Wei Wei Bai's face as cold as ice, without a single trace of emotion. Wei Wei Bai frowned impatiently. I'm leaving first. She turned around and left without hesitation. The system reminded her, favorability. Wei Wei Bai felt hopeless. No, I'm still not prepared. When I think of this woman coveting me, I want to make her kowtow to the ground. The system, coveting? Wei Wei Bai said in loneliness, I'm still too perfect. Let me struggle a little more, let me be with my moral integrity for a while. The system, moral integrity? Wei Wei Bai had only taken 2 steps when hurried footsteps came from behind her, and a pair of hands was about to hug her waist. Almost instinctively, she turned around and extended her leg to kick Feng Ling away. The system roared, face the ground. With this kick, 80 favorability would become a hell instance. Bai Weiwei abruptly stopped her movements and staggered 2 steps. A soft body had already thrown itself into her arms. Weiwei Bai's nose was filled with the woman's fragrance, and her body was in her arms. She was completely frozen, and her brain was a little blank. Feng Ling hugged her, and a painful struggle flashed through her eyes. I'm already here, don't you have anything to say? How long are you going to fight with me? Weiwei Bai had goosebumps. She could not hear what she was saying, and she really could not accept women. If there was a sexual orientation test, she would be the legendary straight woman. Feng Ling's voice suddenly became bitter. Are you still blaming me for sending people to assassinate you? Weiwei Bai gritted her teeth, and really wanted to push her away. Feng Ling thought of her purpose. The country was taken by Weiwei Bai, so even if she had to sacrifice herself, she had to return to the throne. Even if she had to give up her body, it did not matter. She suddenly smiled sadly. I really hate you, Weiwei Bai. You stole my heart, but you don't care about me. Weiwei Bai, why do I feel that this line sounds familiar? Feng Ling let go of her. Her eyes were filled with tears and her face was filled with sadness. She suddenly took off her clothes. Under the bright light, her body was as beautiful as jade. I was wrong. If I had accepted you back then, one of us would be the protector of the nation, and the other would be the emperor who loves the people. As Feng Ling spoke, she threw all the clothes at her feet. Her tears fell and her voice was choked with sobs. Weiwei, do you still want me? Do you want me, a person who rejected you, wanted to kill you, but regretted it so much that I want to return to your side? Weiwei Bai was speechless for a moment. She said to the system, damn, is this woman trying to woo me? Haven't I been using this pitiful trick all along? The system retorted, how can you tolerate that? Beat her to death. Weiwei Bai's spirit of a drama queen burned fiercely. She closed her eyes in silence. Her fingers were clenched tightly, and her body seemed to collapse. Even her shoulders were trembling. Feng Ling looked at her with tears all over her face. A hint of gloomy joy flashed through her eyes. She really did care about her. As long as she was the empress, she would be able to take back this world one day. Weiwei, you want me, right? You can kill me or chase me away, but please fulfill my wish. Weiwei Bai finally opened her eyes. All kinds of complicated emotions flashed through her eyes. Conflict, love, guilt, and a cowardly escape that she wanted to hate but could not hate. A simple look was enough to silence Feng Ling's dirty thoughts. She even felt a little sad. It turned out that she still loved her. Weiwei Bai walked slowly to her side and picked up the clothes on the ground one by one. Chapter 527. You can search Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come to the search web on Baidu to find the. Then, she put them on her one by one. Her movements were so delicate and gentle. Feng Ling looked at her with a pale face. Weiwei Bai sighed, filled with nostalgia and tenderness. You're still so impulsive. Although we women don't need to pay so much attention to chastity, I don't want you to betray yourself for benefits. Feng Ling moved her lips. No, I couldn't help it, a finger gently pressed against her lips. Weiwei Bai's beautiful face flushed red. Her voice was soft and gentle. Don't lie to me. I know that you've never liked me. But even if you're like this, I still. She didn't finish her sentence, but it was filled with endless emotions. Weiwei Bai's eyes welled up with tears. A drop of tear streaked across her cheek. She looked just right. Then, she turned around and was about to leave. Feng Lingxin was anxious. She had already reached out and grabbed her sleeve. Weiwei Bai's voice trembled. Don't say anymore. Do you know how much effort I spent to suppress my feelings for you? Feng Ling felt upset. I understand. Ding, Feng Ling's favorability is at 65. Weiwei Bai smiled sadly. You don't understand. You don't understand the pain of loving someone but not being able to get what you want. Feng Ling's heart ached at her words. She had feelings for her, but power and the country had pushed them onto opposite paths. Feng Ling's eyes were red. How can I not understand? You're so good to Feng Yunyan. Have you never thought about my feelings? Wei Wei Bai fell silent. Suddenly, she flung her hand hard and forced Feng Ling back with her internal energy. Then, she waved her wide sleeves and turned around proudly. I used to care so much about your feelings, but you hurt me deeply, while Yunyan warmed me. Feng Ling's eyes were filled with sorrow. She gritted her teeth and said, but that's not love. He looks so similar to me. You're just looking for a substitute. Wei Wei Bai smiled helplessly. Yes, so what if I'm a substitute? You don't love me, so I can only let go. This heavy love. The two of them were tormented until they were covered in bruises. Feng Ling felt that she was about to lose her beautiful past. They shattered bit by bit before his eyes. Ding, Feng Ling's favorability is at 70. She looked at Wei Wei Bai's back and suddenly shouted, I love you, Wei Wei Bai. Ding, Feng Ling's favorability is at 75. Wei Wei Bai shuddered and stopped in her tracks. I love you. I always have. Feng Ling's eyes were filled with tears. So can you turn back? She had hurt her deeply. It was her fault. Ding, Feng Ling's favorability is at 80. She has locked in her favorability. Side mission completed. Wei Wei Bai's expression was one of deep love and struggle. The tears in her eyes retracted in a second. She said indifferently, that's your business. I'm leaving. The rest of the Empress conferral ceremony was easy. She could just send Feng Yunyan away for a while and hold a simple Empress conferral ceremony. Then, after the mission was completed, she would kick Feng Ling away. Wei Wei Bai smiled calmly. This side mission was nothing much. Then, she turned around and glanced at Feng Ling. She looked at her with disdain. With such little acting skills, she still dared to show it. She would have to cultivate for 1,000 years before she could eat the soil behind her feet. Feng Ling saw her gaze and thought that she was hesitating. But in the next second, Wei Wei Bai ran away. She had been out for so long that Feng Yunyan was about to become suspicious. Feng Ling watched her leave sadly. She reached out her hand, but in the end, she retracted it helplessly. It was all her fault. It was her scheme that hurt Wei Wei Bai's heart. To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to read on your phone, https://msashu.com. Chapter 528. Just as Wei Wei Bai left, a tall figure walked out from the wall. He looked at Wei Wei Bai's departing figure and lowered his head to look at his splayed fingers. His palms were covered in blood from his fingernails. Did it hurt? Feng Yunyan felt numb to the pain. He walked into the cold palace and saw Feng Ling sitting on a chair in a daze, her face haggard. Suddenly, Feng Ling looked up and saw Feng Yunyan standing in front of her. He was expressionless, and there was a gloomy and vicious aura on his gentle and handsome face. Feng Ling immediately entered battle mode and snorted. See? Bastard. The word bastard always hurt Feng Yunyan. But now, he didn't feel anything at all. The most painful moment was when he heard Wei Wei Bai say, so what if I'm a substitute? You don't love me, so I can only let go. At that moment, his heart was immersed in ice water and thrown into a raging fire. He was crushed into ice and burned to ashes. All that sweet doting was fake. It turned out that he was just a substitute. And the substitute was the person he hated the most. Feng Ling looked at his hateful face. The two of them were so similar. But her appearance was more gorgeous, while his appearance was innocent and pure. It was an eyesore. Wei Wei is just using you as a substitute. To her, I am the person she loves the most. Feng Ling said sharply and wantonly. This smug and arrogant look made Feng Yunyan's eyes turn sinister. Shut up, he ordered coldly. Feng Ling raised a mocking smile. You have been my shadow since you were young. You are my slave, an ant under my feet. Do you think you can soar to the sky just because you cling to Wei Wei? Feng Yunyan staggered back, his face contorted. I told you to shut up. Feng Ling continued maliciously, you didn't expect it, did you? Your face, which is similar to mine, is the key to getting her favor. Feng Yunyan's eyes were bloodshot. He reached out and grabbed her neck. His voice was low and hoarse. Feng Ling, my martial arts are now stronger than yours. I can easily kill you. Feng Ling's face flushed red, but she still tried her best to laugh out loud. Feng Yunyan, I really feel sorry for you. Wei Wei is mine. She loves me. Feng Yunyan's heart was ruthlessly torn apart by these words. Endless darkness and coldness poured in. His voice trembled with anger. Shut up. She's mine. She was so good to him. She gave him a new life and a future. Feng Ling was not afraid at all. She stuttered, "How pitiful. You dare to kill me? Haha, aren't you afraid that she will hate you?" When Feng Yunyan heard this, Wei Wei Bai's hateful eyes flashed before his eyes. His fingers trembled violently and he let go of Feng Ling's neck. Feng Ling became even more arrogant. She laughed mockingly and said, "With your ugly appearance, you're not worthy of being by her side. You overestimate yourself." For the first time, Feng Yunyan didn't dare to fight back. He took a few steps back in a sorry state and suddenly turned to leave. Feng Ling watched him leave smugly. When Feng Yunyan returned to the bedroom, he found Wei Wei Bai sitting on a chair and eating pastries. When she saw Feng Yunyan, she quickly picked up a piece of pastry with a warm smile in her eyes. "Yunyan, where did you go? Come and eat something." Feng Yunyan looked at her in a daze. He was caught off guard and was stuffed with a piece of cake. "Is it delicious?" she asked gently. Feng Yunyan felt bitterness in his mouth. He opened his mouth, but he couldn't say anything. In the end, there was only a faint response. "It's delicious and sweet." Chapter 529. Yunyan, your nature is similar to mine. We are both the kind of people who will not rest until we are dead once we fall in love. We can't let go or escape. Who was speaking? Feng Yunyan looked ahead in a daze. A man wearing the emperor's outfit was standing by the lake. His voice was faint, distant, and close. "I'm very worried about your personality. If you meet a good person, it would be the greatest blessing to be able to spend the rest of your life with her." Feng Yunyan suddenly remembered who this man was. His pupils constricted, and he immediately chased after him. No, but if you meet the wrong person, it will be a disaster." Feng Yunyan reached out and grabbed his robe, but it was too late. The man jumped into the lake and sank. His face was covered in cold sweat, and he immediately opened his eyes. His face was extremely pale, and his beautiful eyes were filled with confusion. Father, he remembered that his father met the person he loved and gave birth to him. But later, that woman took men into the palace one after another. His father couldn't get what he loved, so he personally poisoned the woman who betrayed him. After failing, he committed suicide by jumping into the lake. Feng Yunyan lowered his eyes and looked at the wound on his hand. There was a crazy viciousness in his deep and cold eyes. Once he fell in love with someone, no matter how ruthless the other party was, he would jump into the fire without hesitation like a moth. And even if the other party betrayed him, he couldn't give up. He still loved her like he did in the beginning. He loved her by hook or by crook. This was the most similar thing between him and his father. Feng Yunyan sat on the couch for a long time before suppressing his intense thoughts. He put on his outer robe and walked out. Outside was a small hall where government affairs were handled. He stood by the door and saw Wei Wei Bai holding a brush. Her clean and beautiful ink hair hung behind her back with a hairband. He couldn't look away from her slender and beautiful back. She frowned sometimes and smiled sometimes. She didn't have much expression. But Feng Yunyan stared greedily. His heart ached, but he still couldn't bear to not love her. A crazy thought even appeared in his mind. So what if he was a substitute? Before Feng Ling appeared, didn't she like him very much? As long as the real deal was not around, she had no choice but to choose the substitute. This idea was too dark and crazy. Feng Yunyan suppressed his anger. Wei Wei Bai turned and saw that it was him. She immediately put down her pen and said, "Yunyan, come and take a look at this." Feng Yunyan was a little slow. He was silent for a moment before he slowly walked over. She reached out and held his hand. She looked up and said with a smile, "What do you think of the garden design?" Feng Yunyan lowered his head and looked at the design on the table. The blueprint was very detailed. The pavilions, terraces, and small bridges all looked very comfortable and beautiful. Wei Wei Bai said softly, "This is a southern design. I was thinking that when we go out for summer vacation in the future, there will be a place you like." Feng Yunyan's father was from the south. Therefore, the things he liked were all designs that leaned towards the gentle southern style. Feng Yunyan blinked and opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. He looked at the blueprint but couldn't say anything. Could a person really treat a substitute so well to this extent? How could she be so good to him? Ding, Feng Yunyan's favorability has increased to 85. Wei Wei Bai said, doting is indeed the way of the king. The favorability has increased smoothly. The system was silent for a moment. It wanted to remind her, but when it saw the system rules above its head, it shut up. Chapter 530. The side mission of this plane was intertwined with the main mission. Before completing the side mission, it couldn't remind her that Feng Yunyan already knew about Feng Ling's existence. It couldn't even tell her that the male lead of this plane was mentally ill. After falling in love with someone, no matter what the other party did to hurt him, his love and favorability would not change. It would continue to increase. But, the blackening value would skyrocket. The system had broken many rules, and it would continue to break the rules to let her successfully advance. One day, it would not be able to hide it from the headquarters. When that time came, the system stopped its miserable imagination of the future. It could only remind her implicitly, "You haven't completed the mission yet, don't be smug." Wei Bai smiled smugly and said, "Leave it to me, I can do it." System, this reminder was completely ignored. After reading the blueprint, Wei Bai opened the address of the garden. "This place is very good. No, it seems better to have a river here to draw water, but this side has a lotus field. It's really hard to choose." Feng Yunyan looked at her sideways, his eyes as gentle as water. The pain of being hurt by Feng Ling was slowly soothed by her gentle words. At least she still had him in her heart. He thought humbly and timidly that it was good to have him, good to have him. Wei Bai suddenly smiled and looked at him with bright eyes. "Yunyan, can I give you a mission?" Feng Yunyan sank into her beautiful eyes and asked in a low voice, "What mission?" Wei Bai circled the addresses with a brush. "There are 3 locations for the garden. I don't know which to choose because it's based on your preferences, so you can go and check it out yourself, okay?" Feng Yunyan's eyelashes fluttered, and he couldn't help but pinch his fingers. "Your Majesty, aren't you coming with me?" Bai Weiwei's lips curled into a smile. She had a helpless expression, but also a doting one. "I wish I could have you by my side every day, but the court is busy, so I can only let you leave me for a while. It would take at least 6 to 7 days to investigate the location of the garden." The hope in Feng Yunyan's eyes was drenched with coldness. His voice was still gentle. "But I can't bear to leave your Majesty." Just as he finished speaking, his lips were kissed by her, and her breath surrounded him. Their moist lips intertwined, creating an intoxicating sweetness between each other's lips. This kiss made Feng Yunyan's mind go blank. When she left him, his eyes were still filled with confusion. The corners of Wei Bai's eyes were dyed a light red. Her beautiful face was even more alluring at this moment. "I know you can't bear to part with me, and so can I. But I know Yunyan will go." This sentence made him unable to say any words of rejection. He was silent for a moment as he looked at her smile. After a long time, he lowered his eyes and revealed a faint smile. "All right, as you wish." Then, he turned around and walked out. His steps were slow, and his back was long and lonely. Before he left, he turned around and said softly, "Your Majesty, you." Wei Bai was puzzled. Feng Yunyan's brows were slightly gloomy as he stared at her with his beautiful eyes. Wei Bai thought he wanted to say something. But he quickly turned around and walked out slowly. Wei Bai was extremely sensitive and felt that something was wrong. "Tongzi, does Feng Yunyan know that I cheated?" The system held back. "You finally found out about my host. But it could only go against its conscience." "This, I'm not sure." Wei Bai said, "It's impossible for him to know about the increase in favorability. Who would have an increase in favorability when they see their partner cheating? He's not a masochist." The system said, "He's not a masochist. I think he's quite a sadist." The below to record this reading record. Oh. Chapter 531. The blackening value was even higher than the favorability. "You're about to become a pervert, wake up, host." Wei Bai, I don't think so. I'd better prepare for the Empress conferral ceremony and complete the side mission first. If she fell face first from a height of 10,000 meters, would she still be able to look at her face? So what if she died? She refused to die in such an ugly manner. The next day, Feng Yunyan brought a team of guards to look at the address of the garden. Wei Bai waved her hand and watched him leave. Then she immediately ran back. She couldn't be careless about the Empress conferral ceremony. This was because the requirement of the side mission was that the Empress conferral ceremony couldn't be skipped. It was still a little rushed to prepare in these 6 or 7 days. Feng Yunyan suddenly turned around and saw Wei Bai's back view leaving mercilessly. He suddenly felt a dull pain in his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. He wiped it expressionlessly. This vomiting of blood was the aftereffect of the poison test. He originally thought that after meeting her, his mood would be stable and peaceful. Would it act up? In the end, it still acted up. Feng Yunyan's eyes were deep and his voice was hoarse. "Wait a little longer. She won't betray me, right?" Wei Bai hurriedly prepared the things needed for the Empress conferral ceremony. Feng Yunyan received a letter. He sat on the chair, holding the letter with his fair and slender fingers. No one knew how long he had been in a daze. Only then did he laugh coldly. And the letter was torn apart by him bit by bit. His gentle and delicate face slowly twisted. Empress conferral ceremony? She sent him away because of this? Feng Yunyan's face was pale. His brows were furrowed, and his eyes were dark. Hatred and jealousy appeared at the same time. He shouldn't have been soft-hearted. He should have killed Fengling. He actually liked that woman to the point of making her the empress. It was all Fengling who seduced him. That B*TCH seduced him. Feng Yunyan's originally gentle and elegant face was completely occupied by jealousy and hatred. He couldn't help but laugh softly. Wei Bai, I'm not my father. He's useless. He can't keep the person he loves. He had taken all the rights she had given him. He had seen too many heartless emperors and beauties being abandoned in their twilight years. Therefore, even though he was doted on by Wei Bai, he had to be careful. She had given him authority, and he was the one who had promoted all the new officials in the imperial court. She had given him the military authority, and he had already quietly transferred away the most loyal old generals. They were all people that he had promoted. She trusted him too much. He thought that this trust was proof that she loved him. However, the love of an emperor was too cheap. No emperor would favor only one person. He had done so many disgraceful things just to prevent her from accepting other people into the palace in the future. He didn't dare to believe that they could be together forever. But he never thought that this day would come so early. Feng Yunyan's handsome face was gloomy and cold. He suddenly smiled helplessly. So what's the use of liking someone else now? It's too late. I won't let you have the chance to like someone else. He couldn't keep his heart, but it was fine as long as there was someone. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 88. Wei Bai sneezed. She rubbed her nose and said, 88 is really an auspicious favorability. The invasion of this plane was really smooth. The system looked at the full blackening value. Whatever you say, it was already in despair. It couldn't break the rules. Damn it. On the 6th day, the Empress coronation ceremony was finally finished. Fengling hadn't seen Wei Bai for many days. She still felt guilty and didn't dare to make a request. In the end, she was dragged out of bed early in the morning to get dressed. Weren't these the Emperor's clothes? Chapter 532. Fengling was delighted. She still loved her after all. After dressing up, she was quickly sent to the Empress ceremony. Wei Bai wore a red robe, her hair was combed into a bun with a simple jade hairpin. She did not put on any makeup, but she was still beautiful. Fengling looked at her in surprise. Wei, you've finally forgiven me. Wei Bai looked at the time. Feng Yunyan's return was probably tonight. She had to finish the side mission as soon as possible. She did not look at Fengling at all. She grabbed her wrist and dragged her to go through the process. The newly married MC was also in a hurry to be reincarnated. The Emperor had ordered that the faster the better. If they were faster, they would have an extra box of gold. He wished that he could create the wind-fire wheels under his feet and go as fast as possible. It was the fastest Empress ceremony in history. It happened so strangely. The Emperor and his newly appointed Empress were running at full speed. What kind of solemn ceremony was it? They just casually bowed and completed it. Fengling gasped. Wei, I didn't expect you to be so impatient. Wei Bai was expressionless. Haha, I'm so impatient. I'm so impatient to get rid of you. Finally, the MC shouted, husband and wife, bow to each other. Wei Bai immediately pressed Fengling's head. She also lowered her head and bowed to each other. The MC beamed. The ceremony is done. Send them to the bridal chamber. Wei Bai trembled. There's a bridal chamber? The system said, let me check. Wei Bai said, check what? Why are two women in the bridal chamber? Do I need to go to the kitchen and get some cucumbers? The system was speechless. Ding, side mission completed. Responding to the anti-pornography policy, the bridal chamber has been removed. Wei Bai touched her face. Finally, I've kept my beauty. It's not easy. System, so am I. It managed to keep its handsome face. Fengling said shyly, Wei, we are husband and wife now. She knew that Wei had a sharp tongue but a soft heart. Although he looked annoyed, he loved her very much in his heart. Wei Bai was about to fling her sleeve away. From the ground came the rumbling sound of horse hooves shattering the tranquility. It was as if the armored cavalry had appeared from hell. They broke through the door and rushed in with murderous intent. Wei Bai was stunned. Rebel? Among the black armored horses, there was a white horse that stood out the most. Feng Yunyan sat on the horse. His eyes were like black dots, bottomless. He lowered his head and saw Fengling standing behind him. They were holding hands. At this moment, he felt as if his heart was suddenly crushed. A sharp pain whizzed through his body, causing his brain to explode. All the beautiful memories of the past were shattered into dust. Her heart was filled with love and hatred. It was still biting him and refusing to let go. Wei Wei Bai looked like she had seen a ghost. This time, it was too sudden. She crashed for a moment. Feng Yunyan sat on the horse and looked at them silently. That look in his eyes was as if he had caught them in the act. Wei Wei Bai immediately reacted. Listen to me. It's not what you think. Feng Yunyan dismounted and hurried over. He suddenly smiled. I know, Your Majesty. I know everything. Wei Wei Bai felt that there was something wrong with his expression, but she still tried to explain. My feelings for her. He suddenly grabbed her hand fiercely. Then, Wei Wei Bai saw the man in front of her distort with anger in his calm eyes. His voice was faint, but it was filled with endless coldness. You are the one who truly loves her, and I am just a disgusting substitute. I know all this. Wei Wei Bai, when did you know? That was not the point. Wei Wei Bai immediately changed her expression and said affectionately, No, you were wrong. Wei Wei Bai's mouth was agape. Her vision went dark. Then, she fell into Feng Yunyan's arms. Feng Yunyan hugged her. His eyes were red as he looked at Feng Ling maliciously. Clear this place out. Kill everyone who participated in her Empress coronation ceremony. He would not let go, even if it meant destroying both jade and stone. Chapter 533. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, her limbs were sore and weak. Just trying to move would make her tremble as if she had Parkinson's disease. She gritted her teeth. Why didn't you say anything when Feng Yunyan came back? What's the use of raising a useless system like you? The system was helpless, the side mission and the main mission are intertwined. The main system gave me a mission to shut up and not tell you about the existence of the male lead. Wei Wei Bai was surprised. You have a mission too? The system, occasionally, there are rewards for completing them. Wei Wei Bai, how much is the reward? The system silently picked up a bag of spicy strips. I was rewarded with a bag of spicy strips and a chance to draw a prize. Wei Wei Bai used all her strength but couldn't move. She could only lie back down and spit. Your main system is so stingy. The system drew a spicy strip as a reward. I got a prize. Wei Wei Bai immediately perked up. Did you get life points? The system, yes, I'll give you another bag of spicy strips. Wei Wei Bai, who had completely given up on the system and the main system, exploded with unimaginable strength. Her body flipped over and fell to the ground with her head down and feet up. Wei Wei Bai, who still had one foot on the bed, felt like she had nothing left to live for. The door was suddenly pushed open. Wei Wei Bai weakly turned to look. Feng Yunyan was wearing a light blue robe. His posture was elegant, but there was no trace of expression on his beautiful face. He saw Wei Wei Bai fall to the ground. He sighed and then revealed a gentle smile. Your Majesty, why are you on the ground? He walked over and bent down to carry her up carefully. Wei Wei Bai weakly said, What happened to me? She felt like her bones were soft. Even her voice was soft. Feng Yunyan lowered his eyes and suppressed the darkness in them. You're sick? He put her back on the bed. Just as he withdrew his hand, Wei Wei Bai used all her strength to grab his wrist. She frowned and said, Yunyan, I married Feng Ling because... A needle appeared on Feng Yunyan's finger. Like lightning, it pierced into her neck and was pulled out. Then, Wei Wei Bai realized that she was mute. Feng Yunyan's expression turned cold. He revealed a mocking smile. Of course I know what your Majesty is thinking. You found that the real one is better than the substitute, so you sent me out and married her. When I came back, would you casually give me the title of concubine out of guilt? Wei Wei Bai had a look of what the fuck, why are you even better at making things up than me? Feng Yunyan saw that she was looking at her blankly and doubtfully. Her usual flamboyant and gorgeous appearance now had a hint of fragility. Her thin robe fell along the contours of her body. Her slender and weak hand rested weakly on his. It was as if he could break it with just a little bit of force. It gave him a sense of security that he could finally control her. Feng Yunyan smiled, but the stubborn madness in his eyes did not change at all. Your Majesty, I don't want to hear you hate me, and I don't want you to leave me. Those days when she was good to him were too beautiful. He couldn't bear to ruin it. Even if she couldn't speak, even if she could only lie on the bed. Then, for the rest of his life, he would protect her like this and live with those sweet memories. Feng Yunyan gently reached out his hands and hugged her defenseless body. Now that she had lost her mobility, even if she had such powerful martial arts, she couldn't escape. She could only nestle in his arms and be imprisoned by him. Feng Yunyan buried his face in the hollow of her shoulder, smelling the light scent on her body. He closed his eyes and let his heart ache. Your Majesty, let's live like this for the rest of our lives. Quick to read at https://www.sashu.com// quick to txt download at https://www.sashu.com// Sashu. Come quick to read on. Come quick. Chapter 534. By mute way hard to express love hard to express, she could only communicate with the system using her brain waves. I think I can still be saved. The system who was eating spicy strips said, I think it's time for you to show your best acting skills. Wei bye, ? The system said, acting skills are at the peak. Even hair is part of the show. There's no need for words, no need for body language. Those are all superficial things. Silence is the key to the test of acting. Wei Bai said expressionlessly, come, show me an I love you expression. The system was silent for a while. Suddenly, a line of subtitles floated in front of Bai Weiwei, #AINI#. The system said gently, in silence, in the void, my love for you is so obvious. Wei Bai flipped the system. If she could send a caption, would she still be like this? Even if she could, she wouldn't dare to. Who knew if Feng Yunian, this guy with a brain problem, would burn her as an evildoer? In the following days, Feng Yunyan was very satisfied and well-behaved. He fed her, combed her hair, cut her nails, and dressed her. He was super obedient. He could bathe her gently, but he didn't disrespect her at all when he wiped her body. This made Wei Bai confused. Was this guy impotent? Or was the 88 favorability points all friendship points and not love points? What was even more strange was that the favorability points increased. 90, Wei Bai wondered if the favorability points would be full if she lay flat on the bed until the end of the mission. Your Majesty, the garden you gave me is already under construction. Feng Yunyan carried her to the pavilion in the Imperial Garden. There were soft chairs, carpets on the floor, and warm charcoal stoves all around. He put on a warm white fox fur coat for her and wrapped her up like a white furball. He started to make tea. Outside the pavilion, it was snowing. Wei Bai sat on the chair weakly and looked at him expressionlessly. Her eyes were filled with worry and her face was pale. After being imprisoned for a long time, one's spirit would deteriorate. Feng Yunyan finished brewing the tea and brought it to her lips. Your Majesty, drink some tea made from the first snow collected this year. There was a slight fluctuation in Wei Bai's eyes. She wanted to say something but stopped. However, he completely ignored her. Instead, he slowly but persistently fed her tea. Wei Bai felt that if this continued, when the time was up, she would definitely not be able to fill up the favorability points. She had to find a breakthrough. When Feng Yunyan was not looking, she raised her weak hand and slapped the teacup from his hand. This action made her unable to help but gasp for breath in a low voice. Her face was a bit red, and her beautiful face carried a trace of sharpness. Feng Yunyan stared blankly at the broken teacup at his feet. Suddenly, he raised his head and said in a low voice, Are you blaming me? Your Majesty. Wei Bai's eyes softened, but there was helplessness in them. How could I blame you, the person I love the most? This was the silent gaze that was filled with love. However, in the next second, her eyes were covered by his dry and warm hand. White mute blind Wei Bai, haha, she was not acting anymore. Who could be mute and blindfolded and paralyzed? Try acting as I love you. Call you Pop alive. Feng Yunyan's voice was hoarse and trembling uncontrollably. Do you blame me? You blame me for making you like this, but I had no choice. Wei Bai, Feng Yunyan's voice became deranged. I killed Feng Ling. Of course, I knew that you would definitely hate me. I made you a mere figurehead, destroyed your body, and made you unable to go anywhere. Wei Bai. The fast. Chapter 535. Cannon fodder Feng died so quickly that he didn't even have a line before he died? Feng Yunyan's voice choked up. I won't let you go. I want you to only rely on me for the rest of your life. No one can take you away. The only light and warmth he had left. It was all given to him by her. She only needed to say a word of hatred to take away the pitiful and sweet illusion he had left. Wei Bai felt some warm liquid fall on the back of her hand. She opened her mouth to comfort him, but found that she couldn't speak. She could only sigh helplessly. Feng Yunyan didn't say anything. The fingers covering her eyes trembled violently, and tears kept falling from his eyes. He couldn't bear the look in her eyes that hated him. He couldn't turn back, but he still hoped that his gentle care would make her not hate him so much. Wei Bai slowly reached out and touched his face with all her strength. His face was full of tears. He was crying like a silly girl who had been hurt. Don't cry, fool. She gently touched his face with her fingers, silently saying, Don't cry. Feng Yunyan stared at her blankly. Suddenly, he moved his fingers away, but saw her eyes full of gentleness. Her face was more beautiful than snow, with a helpless but beautiful smile. There was no trace of hatred in her beautiful eyes. She seemed to want to say something, but she only opened her mouth and pursed her lips in disappointment. Feng Yunyan's heart was in pain. Her hand that was gently placed on his face suddenly lost its strength and fell. Feng Yunyan was at a loss. He immediately grabbed her hand. He lowered his head awkwardly and wiped his tears with his other hand. The snow is heavy. Let's go, Your Majesty. He didn't dare to look at her, afraid that the gentleness just now was just his imagination. Wei Weibai looked at him with dead eyes. I tried my best. This was truly a drama, but who knew that Feng Yunyan had a frightening heart of glass? He was afraid that he would be hurt. He didn't believe anything but his own self-torture. The system said, how about we buy an antidote? Wei Weibai, why didn't you say so earlier? The system said, the second time you buy the antidote will cost 10 times more. I don't think you're willing to do that. Wei Weibai was excited. Am I that stingy? 10 times? The system kindly reminded him, 50 life points. Wei Weibai, no, thank you. Wei Weibai tried her best to maintain her rich and powerful image. It's useless even if you buy it. Even if I speak, I can't explain why I want to marry Feng Baihe. Feng Yunyan was not a fool. Without a perfect reason, it would be strange if he believed it. The system said, that's true, this is a hurdle that can't be crossed. Wei Weibai sighed, only being a cuckold and a happy father is unforgivable. If he didn't have a good reason, he wouldn't be able to increase his favorability. After Feng Yunyan carried her back and touched the snow, he was a little nervous and immediately took off her clothes. She quietly laid in his arms. After he took off her clothes, her slender and soft body was exposed. Her inner clothes fell loosely on her shoulders. Her delicate and beautiful collarbones were exposed. Feng Yunyan stared blankly for a while, then looked away with great effort. He suppressed the dirty impulse in his head and continued to change her clothes. How could he not desire her? But she was such a proud person, but he had already broken her wings and locked her in a cage. If he forced her again, her dignity would be completely crushed. He was afraid that she would take things too hard. Feng Yunyan nervously helped her put on her clothes. Your Majesty, let's go to the morning court tomorrow. Although he was the one who promoted the new officials. Chapter 536. However, Wei Weibai was still the emperor. While the new official obeyed him, he was still thinking about Wei Weibai's existence. In this world, there were men who held power. However, there had never been a man who became the emperor. Therefore, even if Wei Weibai's power was taken away by him, he still needed to sit in the imperial court. He wanted to let people know that the world had not changed owners. He was not willing to change owners. She was the only emperor in his heart. No one was allowed to take away her position. Wei Weibai gently closed her eyes and nodded silently. The next day, in the imperial court, Wei Weibai lazily leaned against the back of the chair. She listened to the young people chattering and discussing problems. Feng Yunyan was very brazenly handling government affairs for her. From time to time, he would read some important government decisions to her. Every time she nodded, he would reveal a happy smile. Her favorability had also increased to 92. It was only 6 or 7 days until the end of the mission. Wei Weibai had never been so passive. If there was no progress tomorrow, she could only grit her teeth and spend 50 days of her life to buy the antidote. Suddenly, in the imperial court, amidst the harmonious chatter, a discordant shout rang out. Dog thief, you deserve to die 10,000 deaths for holding the emperor hostage. As this sentence rang out, a figure with an extremely fast speed, holding a short blade in his hand, fiercely pounced towards Feng Yunyan. A cold light flashed in Feng Yunyan's eyes. He sneered and did not hesitate to meet the attack. However, the assassin suddenly changed direction. The short blade stabbed towards Wei Weibai. At this moment, Feng Yunyan's brain stopped, but his body forcibly changed direction and rushed towards the assassin. At the last moment, his hand moved extremely quickly and broke the assassin's wrist. Then, he broke the other party's ribs and kicked the assassin away. He used a secret technique to stimulate his potential to increase his speed to this extent. Cut him into 1,000 pieces. Feng Yunyan flashed to Wei Weibai's side, hugged her, and then said to the people in the imperial court. The assassin was quickly dragged away. The identity of the assassin was probably Feng Ling's revenge. After all, Feng Ling was the only hope for the restoration of the previous dynasty. However, he did not hesitate to stab Feng Ling in the heart. He could still see the look of disbelief in her eyes, and her final words echoed in his ears. Even if you kill me, you'll just be a substitute. He didn't dare to think too deeply and hurriedly carried Wei Weibai to the bedroom. The imperial physician came very quickly. He immediately asked him to examine Wei Weibai in detail. Wei Weibai was fine. When Feng Yunyan heard this, he immediately sat down on the chair and spat out a mouthful of blood. Just now, he had stimulated his potential without any regard for his life, and the venom that he had spent a lot of effort to suppress was stimulated once again. Wei Weibai looked at him anxiously. He seemed to want to get up, but fell back. Feng Yunyan quickly said, "I'm fine." Blood continued to flow from his mouth. After he said that he was fine, he fell to the ground and fainted. Wei Weibai asked, "What's wrong, what's wrong?" The system immediately opened its heaven's eye, and scanned Feng Yunyan from head to toe. The male lead's life is shorter than yours. The venom in his body has acted up, and he'll probably die in less than 3 days. Wei Weibai thought, what's going on? So, she doesn't actually have 6 or 7 days left, but less than 3 days? Is there a way to save him? Wei Weibai immediately calmed down and looked for a way. The system kept looking for information, and suddenly, there was a discount in the system supermarket. The exchange pill is on sale, do you want to buy it? Wei Weibai asked, what's the use? The system said, it's an exchange, everything can be exchanged, identity, gender, and, Wei Weibai turned to look at the dying Feng Yunyan, and the venom? The https://www.sashu.com/ the full text at https://www.sashu.com the download text at https://www.sashu.com the at https://msashu.com// to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click save. Chapter 537. Wei Weibai looked at the royal doctor, who had no choice but to save Feng Yunyan. She sighed, there's no other way. To break this stalemate, we can only exchange pills. How much is the exchange pill worth? The system said, there's a big promotion for jumping off a building. Usually, an exchange pill worth 10,000 life points only costs 10 days. You can take it home in 10 days. 10,000 in 10 days, was this jumping off a building? This was jumping off a spaceship. You supermarkets are crazy to offer discounts. Wei Weibai said, buy. If she didn't buy this kind of promotion, she would feel sorry for herself. After buying, Wei Weibai used Feng Yunyan's body to exchange poison. Her healthy blood was completely exchanged with the other party's poisonous blood. After Wei Weibai finished the exchange, she found that she couldn't move anymore. Her blood was poisonous, and her life points had shrunk by half. From 6 or 7 days to 3 days. She didn't expect that when she was poisoned, even her life points would shrink. What happened to the promised cheat of the plane host? Wei Weibai found that all the sweet and smooth planes were fake. She was happy in the beginning, but she was cursed in the end. Sooner or later, she would overwork herself and die in the transmigration. Feng Yunyan knew that the poison in his body was acting up. The poison accumulated when he was young would definitely die if he couldn't suppress it. He felt the familiar sharp pain flowing through his body again. This wasn't the first time he struggled to live. But there was never a time when he struggled so hard. He couldn't die. I'll take you as my husband, okay? She stood in the morning light and said softly. Feng Yunyan reached out his hand, okay, what his fingers touched were all light spots. If I like someone, I like a pair for life. You will be one of my pair in the future. He knew that the love of an emperor was cold and fickle. Why did he still fall into this? When the favorability is 100, I will fall in love with you. She would never have a favorability of 100 for him, ever. Don't worry, no matter how heavy the snow is, I will protect you. The woman's words were still ringing in his ears. Only then did Feng Yunyan realize how unwilling he was. He was unwilling to die. He couldn't bear to leave her like this and let her forget about him. He struggled with all his strength. His pale face was covered with sweat, and his lips unconsciously murmured, Wei Wei. Wei Wei. His strong will to live made him unwilling to die even if he was to suffer the pain of thousands of cuts. Suddenly, an incomparably cool power appeared in his body. Someone placed a hand on his forehead and said softly, Here, I'm here. He immediately relaxed, and his tired and beautiful brows smoothed out. His lips curled into a gentle and serene smile. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 95. That cooling power finally allowed him to escape the pain and fall into a peaceful sleep. Wei Weibai was also leaning to the side, exhausted. After the complete swap, her body was terrifyingly weak. Although the system gave her a painkiller, it couldn't stop her from vomiting blood. Wei Weibai was silent for a while before saying to the system, I need a big stimulus, otherwise I'm worried that I won't be able to get to 100 in 3 days. Without a big stimulus, it was impossible to get to 100 in a short period of time. Even if someone told her that Feng Yunyan had a special personality, she wouldn't be able to get to 100 in 3 days. She didn't dare to gamble. She could only minimize the danger and then leave everything to fate. She wasn't a robot, but she was also anxious and uneasy. Her life points that couldn't increase made her understand that one wrong step could lead to eternal damnation. To survive, she had put in too much effort. The system seemed to have sensed her anxiety and said, The crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download read the full text. 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 To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the button at the bottom to record this reading. You can see it next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 538. After the word I, the system suddenly went silent. Wei Bai waited for a moment. Only then did she hear the system say shyly, I actually have a huge appetite. Wei Bai, ? The system continued, I only ate a portion of your meals in this world. I didn't steal any snacks. I also earned the spicy strips. Wei Bai was stunned for a moment before she reacted and smiled. I know, silly system, because she wanted to complete the mission in one go. Thus, Wei Bai decided not to make up excuses to coax Feng Yunyan for the time being. When there was an exciting event, she would make it up again and sell it. From now on, it was enough to torture people. Feng Yunyan slept for half a day before he opened his eyes. He blinked in confusion and found himself in the familiar bedroom. He immediately sat up and panicked. Your Majesty? While he was unconscious, Bai Weiwei wouldn't have left him, right? Yes. A faint reply came from the window. Feng Yunyan hurriedly looked over and saw her sitting in a wheelchair. Her long hair was casually draped over her shoulders and the side of her face was pale and haggard. Under the light, there was a trace of gentleness. But when he looked at her again, he only saw her beautiful and calm face. Even her eyes were indifferent. Feng Yunyan couldn't help but smile bitterly. What else did he expect? How could he expect her to have feelings for him? He got off the bed and was surprised at how light his body was. It was as if the poisoning was just an illusion. Feng Yunyan was full of doubts. Your Majesty, I was poisoned. Why? Bai Weiwei said indifferently. Zhen saw that you were pitiful because of the poison. Thinking that you really did please Zhen in the past, Zhen had someone give Zhen's life-saving pill to you. It's just a small poison, it will definitely be cured. The effect of his poison needles had a time limit. After not using needles for a while, Wei Bai could speak again. Feng Yunyan stared at her blankly. He thought that he would break down because of her cold words. However, he only lowered his head in silence for a moment before standing up again. He walked to her side and picked her up from the chair. Your Majesty, it's too cold with the windows open. His expression was calm and his movements were gentle, as if he had not been hurt by her. He placed her on the recliner and took a comb to comb her hair. Your Majesty's hair has grown again. It's so beautiful. Her black hair was soft and smooth as it slid past his fingertips. He didn't dare to raise his head and just carefully tidied her hair. Wei Bai lazily narrowed her eyes. What drug did you give me? I can't even move. Feng Yunyan stopped tying her hair. He looked up at her side profile and then lowered his head again. It's a kind of medicine that I created. It doesn't do any harm to the body, but it can deprive the body of stamina for a long time. He couldn't bear to use something too vicious on her. However, he was afraid that her martial arts were strong, and she was not afraid of the poison in his body. He gave her a large dose of the drug. This was the only way he could make her stay. Wei Bai sneered. You're quite capable. You can even develop such a tricky drug. Feng Yunyan's fingers trembled and the hair band fell out from his fingers. He showed a sad expression and a needle appeared on his finger. Wei Bai seemed to have eyes on the back of her head. Why are you turning me into a mute again? Feng Yunyan's fingers trembled violently and the sorrow in his eyes deepened. He moved his lips and his heart was in more pain than when the poison acted up. At least the poison acted up and it was just a physical pain. However, her malicious words of disdain were a fatal blow to him. Wei Bai's tone became indifferent. Forget it. The winner takes all. You've won. I'll accept my death. And read at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 539. Feng Yunyan finally couldn't take it anymore. His gentle face twisted. His body also lost all strength and he knelt down. He reached out his hands in fear and hugged her legs. Then he rested his head on her knees. Your Majesty, I was wrong. Please don't hate me. He couldn't stand her hating him. He thought that his heart was like a boulder, cold and hard enough to face any difficulties. But when facing her, he was as weak as snow under the warm sun, about to melt at any time. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. Let go. Feng Yunyan didn't let go and hugged her even tighter. He trembled violently and looked very pitiful. As long as you don't leave, I won't fight back. You can torture me to vent your anger, he said humbly and anxiously. Wei Wei Bai's fingers clenched. She took a deep breath as if she couldn't bear the burden. That's enough, Feng Yunyan. We said to let go. Did you not think of the consequences of doing these things? Feng Yunyan pursed his lips and hugged her legs tightly, not daring to answer. He was in the wrong. He was jealous. He wanted to be with her for the rest of his life. So he started a massacre. But he would rather die than let go of her. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be tired from struggling. She finally lay down with a tired face. Forget it. Do whatever you want. It doesn't matter if you want to usurp the throne or kill us. Feng Yunyan looked up with red eyes. Why don't you believe me? You are my only empress. I won't let anyone surpass you. Wei Wei Bai's face was very pale. Even her lips were light pink. She looked at him faintly. A complicated emotion flashed through her eyes. Finally, she sighed softly. We are tired. Feng Yunyan immediately stood up and was about to help her rest. Wei Wei Bai waved her hand with difficulty. You can leave. Feng Yunyan's hand froze in midair. He stood there stupidly for a while before saying in a sad voice, Yes, Your Majesty. After saying that, he retreated backwards, one step at a time. He stared at her greedily as if he was worried that he hadn't seen enough. When he retreated to the door, he tripped over the threshold and almost fell out. He had no choice but to turn around and walk out with all his might. Just as he walked out, Wei Wei Bai vomited a mouthful of blood. If Feng Yunyan stayed any longer, she would not be able to hide the fact that she had been poisoned. Tongzi, how is it going? The system said, all right. Your old subordinates already know that you've been kidnapped, so they're leading the cavalry to clean up the emperor's mess. Wei Wei Bai nodded and spat out another mouthful of blood. She calmly wiped it with her handkerchief. The system said, Sigh, that glass heart of yours is squatting outside the door again, crying silently. Bai Wei Wei said earnestly, I didn't deliberately abuse him. I'm not poisoned. I'm trying my best for him. I intend to make him hate me, and then after I die, he won't want to die, but want to live. The system was speechless. Damn it, she was obviously torturing him to death, then seizing the opportunity to let him know her sacrifice. That's great, the favorability towards her skyrocketed. The system indicated that it had seen through the host's plan. Feng Yunyan only dared to guard outside the door, but when he heard that Wei Wei Bai was not eating, he went straight to sleep. He couldn't help but step in again. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai half lying on the bed. Her expression was even worse, and her lips were close to colorless. She looked up faintly, and when she saw him, her gaze sharpened. Wei Wei Bai's voice was weak and hoarse. Get out. Feng Yunyan's chest shook at her rejection. He felt an indescribable pain, but he could only endure it. He knew that she didn't like him anymore. She wasn't even willing to give him any love. Below to record this reading record. Chapter 540. He had even changed his title from I to Zhen. Sometimes, he even had a feeling that he couldn't hold on anymore. He had a vicious and selfish personality, and he didn't know how to repent after making a mistake. Feng Yunyan knew that he didn't regret killing those people at all. He was only in pain because she blamed him. Your Majesty, let me see you. Wei Wei Bai felt that a mouthful of blood was about to surge up from her throat again. She waved her hand. Go away, get out. She was about to vomit blood again. Feng Yunyan's eyes turned red, and there was a kind of dry madness in them. He tried his best to suppress the violent beast in his heart. Your Majesty, don't chase me away anymore. No matter how much you blame me, no matter how much you hate me, don't chase me away. Wei Wei Bai's head was a little dizzy. She coughed and frowned. Feng Yunyan quickly walked forward and reached out to touch her. Your Majesty, what's wrong with you? Wei Wei Bai slapped his hand away reflexively. Get out of my way. This rejection made him completely crazy. His eyes became fierce and irritable. Do you hate me that much? You won't even touch me? Is Fengling that good? He was jealous like crazy. The fact that he wasn't the one and only in her heart made him so angry that he couldn't sleep day and night. How could she coax him with sweet words and make him unable to turn back and consign him to eternal damnation? Run to find her so-called true love again? Feng Yunyan grabbed her hands fiercely, his handsome face full of anger and cold smile. I won't go. If you don't let me touch you, I will. After saying that, he lowered his head fiercely and was about to kiss her lips. Wei Wei Bai wanted to vomit. She really couldn't go against her conscience and let him kiss her. Vomiting in someone else's mouth, wasn't that disgusting? She turned her head away and frowned, feeling uncomfortable. Feng Yunyan thought that she was going to struggle, so he tore her clothes and shouted with red eyes, "Don't struggle, you're mine now. You can't escape no matter what I do to you." He was on the verge of crying when he said the lines of a domineering CEO. Wei Wei Bai was powerless to struggle. Half of her clothes were pulled out by him. She helplessly reached out to pat his face. He barely managed to capture his face. Then, she vomited a large mouthful of blood. She did not spit blood on his face. Feng Yunyan's movements froze, and he looked at her in disbelief. Wei Wei. His fingers trembled as he touched her face. When his fingertips were stained with the blood that she had spat out, he trembled violently. Wei Wei Bai looked at him with tired eyes. Finally, she couldn't help but spit out another mouthful of blood. This poison really liked to make people vomit blood. No wonder he was done for in 3 days. If he vomited for 3 days, he would probably vomit out half of the water in his body. It would be strange if he didn't die. Feng Yunyan's heart was about to break. His voice trembled as he asked, "What's going on?" He grabbed her wrist and checked her pulse. "No, the drug I gave you is harmless. Why are you vomiting blood?" His mind was in a mess, and he felt that her pulse was unusually chaotic. This pulse actually carried the aura of death. Feng Yunyan was so frightened that he didn't dare to continue checking her pulse. He could only take out a bottle of medicine from his pocket in panic. It was the antidote for her weak limbs. He quickly stuffed the medicine into her mouth. "Eat some. You'll be fine after you eat some." After Wei Wei Bai ate it, her body could actually move. The system reminded, "It seems that this body can't hold on any longer. This is the final radiance of the setting sun. You only have about 2 hours left before you can move." "Wei Wei Bai, I'm dying faster than I thought." Then, she spat out another mouthful of blood. Feng Yunyan's pupils shrank. "What's going on? You've already taken the medicine." No, you'll be fine." He immediately became flustered and began to rummage through the medicine bottles. Suddenly, he heard Wei Wei Bai's helpless but gentle voice, "Idiot, I'm fine." After saying that, she slapped him away. Then, he quickly pulled out a piece of tough cloth and tied him up. Feng Yunyan was at a loss. He watched as she calmly wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and began to change her clothes. It was the formal attire of an emperor. The black robe, like the wings of a bird, draped over her thin but straight body. She turned around and gave him a beautiful smile. "Are you stupid or not? Did you really believe that nonsense? I've always only had you in my heart." Oh. Chapter 541. You can search Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come over to search book, www.sashu.com, on Baidu to find the. A few attendants suddenly barged in from outside the door. They knelt down and shouted anxiously, "Rebellion, the generals have rebelled. They have rushed through the city gate and will soon reach the palace gate." Wei Wei Bai looked at them coldly and calmly. "I understand. You can leave." With that, she turned around and walked to Feng Yunyan. She bent down, picked him up, and placed him in the wheelchair. She slapped him so hard that his internal organs were tumbling. The after effects were not big, but he could not move now. She even very considerately tied a tight knot on the cloth that prevented him from moving and tied a big bow. Feng Yunyan looked up with difficulty, and a glimmer of hope and humble desire flashed in his eyes. He seemed to want to ask about what she had said just now, but he was afraid that he had heard wrongly. He did not dare to ask again. Sometimes, loving someone could really make one sad. Wei Wei Bai pushed the wheelchair out, and the wheels crunched on the snow. "Yunyan, I know you blame me." Her voice was faint with a hint of sadness. "I originally thought that if I ignored you and made you give up, you wouldn't be sad in the future." Feng Yunyan tried his best to turn his face to look at the woman behind him in confusion. However, he could only see her robes rustling against the wheelchair. "But you are so stubborn that I can't bear to hurt you anymore." Feng Yunyan had a bad feeling. He was bewildered. "Your Majesty, what are you talking about?" Wei Wei Bai chuckled softly. "I'm confessing to you. I've never loved Feng Ling. Even if I had some different feelings when I was young, they disappeared with time." Feng Yunyan's eyes shook, and an indescribable pain appeared. "Then why did you marry her and make her your empress?" Making a woman his empress was something that no emperor had ever done before. Bai Weiwei had taken a huge risk to marry Fengling regardless of everything else. What was this if not true love? Weiwei Bai pushed him to the entrance of the palace. The Imperial Army was on standby and surrounded the area. She walked from the back of the wheelchair to the front, slowly squatted down, and looked up at him. Feng Yunyan only saw the glimmer of tears in her eyes. She gently curved her lips, her face full of reluctance and tenderness. When I rebelled, there were mountains of corpses and countless vengeful souls. My heart was filled with brutality. Feng Yunyan couldn't help but struggle. He didn't understand why she was suddenly like this, but the uneasiness in his heart turned into fear. It was as if something was about to happen. He could only watch helplessly. Weiwei Bai raised her hand and pressed down on his body, stopping him from moving. The Feng family was also massacred because of me. At that time, I only thought about the pleasure of ruling the world, but I didn't expect to meet you. Feng Yunyan stared at her blankly. A heavy shadow loomed over his heart. You're as gentle as jade, and your grace is outstanding. When I saw you at that time, I felt that you were good-looking, very good-looking. Weiwei Bai's eyes became softer, like a pool of sweet spring water, slowly seeping into his heart. Feng Yunyan finally couldn't help but ask, Your Majesty, what's wrong? Why did she suddenly say this? His heart was filled with fear, and he didn't feel happy. Weiwei Bai's smile didn't change. She stared deeply at him, as if this was the last time she would look at him. Did you know? There was once a medicine that could exchange the blood of two people. There was only a little of this secret medicine left, and it was hidden in the previous dynasty's treasury. Bright red blood suddenly flowed out of Weiwei Bai's lips. In the background of the white snow, it was as red as coral. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. / transmigration system, male god, come here. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here, comma. Chapter 542. And your poison is in your blood? She sighed and smiled helplessly with blood-stained lips. Feng Yunyan stared blankly. The blood continued to enlarge in his eyes. Impossible, there can't be such a medicine, he had never heard of it. He suddenly thought of how light and healthy he looked after he woke up from the poison. He looked at her haggard and pale face. Her body was so weak that it was like a wisp of smoke that could disappear at any time. Weiwei Bai calmly wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and continued, Fengling took away all the medicine. If I want the medicine in her hands, I have to agree to her request to be the empress. Feng Yunyan stared blankly at her, his body trembling. I don't believe it, I don't believe it. Weiwei Bai smiled and said, I wanted to hide it from you, but you came back too quickly and the poison acted up. I had to use the medicine in advance. Her hand fondly stroked his face. Fortunately, I saved you. Even if it was my life, it was worth it. Weiwei Bai's every word was gentle and satisfied. Feng Yunyan saw blood dripping from the corner of her mouth again and finally cried out, It's not worth it, I'm not worth it. Where is the medicine? Let's exchange again. My life is cheap and not worth you using yourself to exchange for it. I beg you, Your Majesty. Weiwei Bai stood up. Outside the palace, iron hooves rumbled. In the cold wind, there was an extremely tense atmosphere. Someone shouted, Treacherous officials are difficult to control. Men rule the country. We swear to clean up the emperor's side. Weiwei Bai's face gradually turned cold. She casually wiped the blood from her mouth with her finger. You came just in time. If you want to take the throne, the people I left behind can't be used. They are too stubborn and strong. They are your biggest stumbling block. Feng Yunyan was such a smart person that he understood what she meant. He gritted his teeth and struggled desperately. His muscles were stretched to the limit, his body bent, and his back trembled. Weiwei Bai turned around and walked forward step by step. Her slender and straight back had an indomitable aura in the howling cold wind. Feng Yunyan shouted at the top of his lungs, Weiwei Bai, come back to me. I'd rather you not love me. Don't love me. If she loved him, she would trade her life for his. He would rather die by her sword in the first place. Weiwei Bai did not turn around, but laughed wantonly. Why can't a man rule the country? My remaining years can. Tears gushed out of Feng Yunyan's eyes. I don't want to be emperor anymore. I've never wanted to be emperor. Please don't go. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 97. Weiwei Bai nimbly mounted the horse. She pulled out her sword, her ink-black hair fluttering in the wind. She looked back at him, the tenderness in her eyes was still there. Yunian, this is my last gift to you. There was no cure for the poison in her body. Before she died, she cleaned up the group of loyal officials who followed her. He had given a country without any obstacles to him to the person he loved the most. It was the last thing she could do for him. Feng Yunyan felt himself become muddle-headed. He struggled with all his might, but the attendants rushed over to hold him down. He watched as she rode her horse and led her soldiers out of the palace gates. The cold sounds of battle filled the air. The long sword in her hand shone like white satin in the snow. The head of the general who had come to clean the monarch's side was instantly split into two. Feng Yunyan fell to the ground. The servants tried their best to stop him. The cloth on his body had not been torn. He could only free one hand and hold on tightly to the snow on the ground. He opened his mouth and roared with his mind torn apart. Bai Weiwei, come back, I don't want the country, I want you. To read at https://www.sashu. Comto TXT download at https://www.sashu. Come to read on your. Chapter 543. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 98. Blood flowed warmly on the ground. It was a ghastly sight. The female soldiers who were protecting Feng Yunyan saw that the attendants were powerless and ran over to surround him. They were the confidants that Weiwei Bai had left for Feng Yunyan. But even so, they could barely suppress his body that was moving forward with all his might. The vibration of iron hooves, the clash of blades, and the flying of flesh and blood. All of these scenes formed a huge twisting vortex that made Feng Yunyan reach out in despair, but he couldn't touch it at all. News of victory kept coming. One by one, the generals who had once been brilliant died. They were all Weiwei Bai's most loyal subordinates, but they all died at the hands of the emperor they were loyal to. The people who came to clean up the emperor came after reading Weiwei Bai's letter asking for help. Those cowardly fence-sitters didn't dare to come. Only the most loyal people would come. But they were Feng Yunyan's biggest obstacle. She had once led them to a successful rebellion and to the top of the country. But because of a man, she personally killed this group of confidants that she had promoted. This love was heavy and crazy. It was unbelievable. Even Feng Yunyan felt that he was having a nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. When all the people who came to clean up the emperor died, those attendants and female soldiers also let go of Feng Yunyan. Everyone knelt down and kowtowed, shouting to him, "Congratulations to the new emperor on ascending the throne. This subject greets your majesty." Feng Yunyan's eyes were red as he shouted angrily, "Get lost, all of you get lost." Who was the new emperor? His emperor was only Weiwei Bai. She wasn't dead yet. How dare this group of rebellious people call him that? The cloth on his body loosened a lot. He staggered to his feet and ran forward with his body bent like he was being crushed. The entrance of the palace was covered in blood, which was especially conspicuous in the snow. There were corpses everywhere. Your Majesty, there was nothing else in Feng Yunyan's eyes. He looked around in panic, looking for that familiar figure. She was so strong, nothing would happen to her. She was the woman with the best martial arts skills he had ever seen. She would not fall so easily. Suddenly, a black horse slowly approached, and a familiar figure hobbled over while leading the horse. Feng Yunyan stopped in his tracks, his eyes bursting with an unimaginable brilliance. The horse stopped. Weiwei Bai leaned against the horse and looked at him with a bright smile. Her face was covered in blood, her hair was messy, and her clothes were tattered and dirty. But it didn't do any damage to her beauty. Feng Yunyan's footsteps became hurried, but because he was too anxious, he tripped and rolled on the snowy ground. He didn't care at all and smiled foolishly. Your Majesty, Weiwei, it's fine as long as you're fine. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 100. Mission completed. The host's body has suffered great damage and is on the verge of death. Countdown to escape time and space, 3 seconds, 2, 1, he climbed up in a sorry state and ran forward without a care for anything else. Suddenly, the horse seemed to be startled. It neighed and ran away in grief. Weiwei Bai's smile didn't change as she stood there stiffly for a while. Then she suddenly fell down. The cold blade that was stabbed into her back was revealed. That place was exactly where her heart was. Her back was like a lake of blood, flowing with dirty blood. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that she couldn't be alive. Feng Yunyan's footsteps slowed down as he stared at her in a daze. The wind and snow became stronger. It gradually blurred his eyes. I'll take you as my husband, how's that? Good. Chapter 544. Host's mission is complete. 30 days of life points gained, a total of 130 days of life points gained. Wei Wei Bai woke up weakly and heard the system's notification. Ding, deducting 15 days of commoner meals from the system cafeteria, 5 days of antidote vaccines, 10 days of exchange pills and 10 days of painkillers. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. Especially when she heard the system's next words, she felt like Huang Shuren was squeezing Yang Bailao dry. It was more than just tragic. Congratulations, host. 40 days of life points deducted, 90 days of life points remaining. Yes, it was a tough plane. She had to hack people, be hacked by people, be poisoned, and have a lesbian relationship. In the end, she even had to pay. Tongzi, do you have the host's poverty subsistence allowance? The system flipped around. Yes. Bai Weiwei's spirit shook. Is there really such a thing? She was just asking casually. The system said, yes, if the host is so poor that they can't recognize you, you can apply for it. Wei Wei Bai asked, what kind of good things can I give the host? Such a good thing, why didn't they apply for it earlier? The system said, a humane euthanasia, so that you can die happily without any pain before you die. Wei Wei Bai, the system said, the main system thinks that death is the best ending for the host who is too poor to live. It's especially considerate and provides a cemetery service after death. Wei Wei Bai stared at the system. Was this a fucking subsistence allowance? It was guaranteed that you would die without a doubt. Wei Wei Bai really wanted to cry. Reality was too cruel. Why was her transmigration so different from other people's? She didn't get any of those legendary cheats. She even lost her life points. I can only use it on Yi Yuxuan. If possible, can I stay in reality and attack Yi Yuxuan? She was tired to death in the plane, so she might as well get some from Yi Yuxuan. The system said, transmigration allows your body to accommodate other people's life points. You can now accommodate 150 days of external life points. Therefore, in reality, they would at most live for less than half a year. Wei Wei Bai sat up and found that she was wearing a hospital gown. Every time she woke up in the hospital, it was nothing new. She trembled and wanted to get off the bed to look for Yi Yuxuan. Her only hope for survival was her fiancé. Suddenly, the door was pushed open and Bai Changyan rushed in. He saw Wei Wei Bai sitting there. He immediately said in surprise, Wei Wei, you're awake. Wei Wei Bai's voice was a little hoarse. Daddy, how are you feeling? She still hadn't forgotten the last time when he wasn't in good health. Bai Changyan immediately pushed the wheelchair and ran to the side of the bed. You've recovered from your anger. Quick, sit up. Wei Wei Bai was puzzled as he helped her into the wheelchair. Then, she saw her father, who was not in good health, push her all the way out as if he had eaten a miracle medicine. What's wrong? Was it an earthquake or a fire? She looked like she was fleeing. Did something happen in the hospital? Bai Changyan said fiercely, it's a man-made disaster. Yi Yuxuan, that bastard, is worse than a beast. He won't let you transfer to another hospital even if he dies. Wei Wei Bai said, the hospital here is the best place to treat heart disease, Daddy. Bai Changyan became agitated. Listen to Daddy. You can't stay here anymore. That bastard to you, he immediately shut up. He didn't dare to let his daughter know that she was molested when she fainted. She was fragile and needed protection. How could he let her face such a cruel thing? Bai Changyan cursed that inhumane bastard 10,000 times in his heart. Wei Wei Bai was confused. What's wrong? What's wrong? Why did she feel like the world had changed when she woke up? Bai Changyan vowed solemnly, I'll let you escape. Then, I'll immediately break off the engagement with that guy Yi Yuxuan. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 545. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she quickly turned around and took his hand. Dad, why did you cancel the engagement? Once the engagement was cancelled, she would not be pouncing on Yi Yuxuan in the future as an unmarried couple, but as a female rogue molesting an innocent man. Bai Changyan's face was sad and conflicted. In the end, he could only bear it and say, anyway, it's right to cancel it. Listen to Dad. If she didn't have Yi Yuxuan, she would be finished after crossing a few more planes if she continued to throw herself at him. Wei Wei Bai was excited and didn't think much. She grabbed her silly father's hand and couldn't help but shout, no, Dad, Yi Yuxuan is my life. Bai Changyan stopped and looked at her in shock. A clatter came from the corner. Qin Qiu, who was passing by, dropped the iron plate in his hand. He was stunned. Beside Qin Qiu stood a man in casual clothes. His face was a little pale, and the dark circles under his eyes were obvious, but he was still very handsome. His pupils were dark and suppressed the brilliance in his eyes. He stared blankly at Wei Wei Bai. She said that he was her life. Ding, life fishing started. 91 days, 93 days, 99 days, stimulation stopped, excitement level remained stable. If the excitement level was stable, it would not feed back her life points. Wei Wei Bai's eyes couldn't help but soften. She looked at Qin Qiu's side. Yi Yuxuan. She could almost see the 3 shining golden characters on his left cheek. Life points. There were also 3 big words on his right face. Come and get it. His forehead was full of tycoon medals. She used to think that his face was cold and stiff, as if he was injected with hyaluronic acid. Now she thought that he was handsome enough to change her aesthetic. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but reach out and sweetly shout to him, Yuxuan, come, give me a hug. Father Bai's dog face, what did he hear, see? Daughter, what's wrong with you? Matchmaker Qin immediately smiled like a blooming flower. Aya, Sister Wei Wei, you and Xiao Xian are really close. Then, he turned and bumped into Yi Yuxuan, who was in a daze. However, Yi Yuxuan did not move. He continued to stare at her without moving his feet. Qin Qiu was anxious. Didn't he want to sleep with her? The girl had already taken the initiative, so why was this dumb roe deer cowering? Even if it was the first time he was in a relationship, he shouldn't be so passive and silent. Even a blind date wouldn't want such a person. Yi Yuxuan's eyes were deep and serene, carrying a glass like cold fire. His voice was hoarse, carrying a few traces of imperceptible tremors. Wei Wei? Wei Wei Bai seemed to have entered a battle. Her back was straight and elegant, and her face was slightly tilted up, revealing her delicate chin. Her eyes were misty, and her lips were slightly red. Then, she casually pretended to be very flirtatious. In fact, she was just using her fingers to slowly tuck her hair behind her back. A Xian. Yi Yuxuan, a Xian. She changed the way she addressed him too quickly. However, Yi Yuxuan turned a deaf ear to her. He stared at her blankly, as if in a trance. Qin Qiu was anxious to death. What was going on? Why did she crash? Go, go, go. However, Yi Yuxuan suddenly sighed. The light in his dark eyes finally bloomed. He seemed to have changed into a different person, revealing a gentle smile. Wei Wei Bai's heart flashed a trace of doubt. She felt that this smile was not like Yi Yuxuan. However, before this doubt could brew into a problem, Yi Yuxuan strode in front of her. His expression was complicated. He reached out to touch her, his fingertips trembling. The Chapter 546. Just as he was about to touch her, a hand grabbed his wrist tightly. Yi Yuxuan looked up and saw that Father Bai was so angry that his hair was standing up. You unscrupulous bastard who doesn't have any good thoughts. You don't have any core socialist values and have gone astray. What do you want to do to my ignorant daughter? Did you see that when he was around? This little bastard even dared to touch his daughter. When he wasn't around, this perverted wolf cub might have done something heartless to his daughter. When he thought of this, Bai Changyan felt that he was in a bad mood. He shouldn't have been greedy and let his daughter marry into the Yi family. These people from the rich capitalist families were all inhumane. Father Bai felt that he was very regretful. He looked at Yi Yuxuan and his eyes were filled with grief and indignation. Just as a tear of regret was about to fall. But he saw that Yi Yuxuan, whose hand he had grabbed, had 2 lines of beautiful tears quietly falling from his deep eyes. Father Bai, who still had tears in his eyes, Yi Yuxuan silently reached out and touched his face with his fingers. His tears couldn't stop falling. He clearly didn't have a crying expression, but his expression was extremely sad. Then, he lowered his head and looked at Wei Wei Bai. His tone was gentle with a hint of grievance. Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai's heart clenched when she saw his pitiful and quiet gaze. She really wanted to give him a loving hug and tell him not to cry. When did Yi Yuxuan learn how to act cute? So scary. Wei Wei Bai didn't want to lose. She immediately put on a loving gaze and gently pushed her father away. Then, she opened her arms. Xian, what's wrong? Yi Yuxuan took 2 steps forward and slowly squatted down under everyone's shocked gaze. Then, he rested his head on her legs and reached out to hug her slender waist. This was a snuggling and comforting gesture. Wei Wei Bai didn't know what was wrong with him. She felt his soft hair against her clothes and his face against her legs. His tears slowly seeped into her skin. A feeling of heartache suddenly appeared in her heart. The pain seemed to be from the first time this man had given her. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head, and the hypocrisy in her eyes faded away, replaced by calmness and throbbing. She reached out, hesitated for a moment, and finally touched his hair. It was as if he was comforting an injured lone wolf. What's wrong? Yi Yuxuan was silent for a long time. Her voice was so faint that it made people feel sad. They're all bullying me. Wei Weibai was dumbfounded. Who would dare to bully Yi Yuxuan? However, her first reaction was to look up at Bai Changyan and purse her lips in grievance. Dad, don't bully him. Old man Bai looked aggrieved. Then she turned to look at Qin Qiu. Are you bullying him too? Qin Qiu? Yi Yuxuan hugged her and felt that she had finally returned to her place of peace. No longer in the dream, that desperate and lonely world. The peerless concubine of the female supreme emperor. It was another year of snowy days. Feng Yunyan took off the emperor's formal attire and put on a simple robe. Fine wrinkles had appeared on his face. When he saw his own face this morning, he was a little scared. He tried to put on makeup to make himself look better. However, he stopped. He remembered that Wei Wei didn't like men who put on fat. However, he was old and ugly. Would she not like him? Chapter 547. Feng Yunyan realized that he had a few strands of white hair. He could only carefully pull them out in an attempt to make himself look younger. Today was the anniversary of her death. He took the pastries that she liked when she was alive and some incense, candles, and joss paper to worship her. Her mausoleum was built very luxuriously, leaving a place for him. 100 years later, he would be able to enter this place after death. Just thinking about it made him happy. Feng Yunyan looked at the tombstone. The snow fell on his hair, making it look like he had white hair. He burned the joss paper. Wei Wei, are you okay? Only the cold wind whistled past. He was used to it. You never told me that your favorability had reached 100. She only said 99. Feng Yunyan revealed a calm smile. But when you personally killed the old officials who were loyal to you and sent me to the throne, I knew that it was your 100. He still remembered that she said embarrassedly that if the favorability reached 100. He didn't want her anymore after he obtained the country. The truth was that she gave him the country and didn't want him anymore. There was a drought at the beginning of this year. There were so many memorials on my desk that I could be buried. He smiled. They were all scolding me. They said that I was a man who inherited the orthodoxy and that the heavens couldn't tolerate it. Even if I lightly taxed them and focused on irrigation and agriculture, making their lives better, I was still a monster. Whenever there was a natural disaster, it was his fault. She also knew that she had taken away the most powerful people back then. When she died, those ministers who had killed their way out of a mountain of swords and a sea of blood only obeyed her. When she died, his man ascended the throne. These people all rebelled. Even though she had cleared so many obstacles for him, he still had a hard time all these years. It was very hard. Feng Yunyan said softly as he burned the joss paper. It was as if this could reduce the pain in his heart. It could also make the incomparably heavy thoughts lighter. Wei Wei, guarding the country is really boring. How could I have ever thought of being the emperor? When he said this, he could no longer hold back his tears and they fell from his eyes. He hurriedly wiped it away. It's all my fault. Why are you always complaining? I should say something happy. Then, Feng Yunyan choked with sobs and forced a smile as he talked about how many good deeds he had done for the country and the people. He reluctantly stayed up until late at night before he was willing to return to the palace. The moment he returned to the palace, he saw his trusted servant hurrying over to report to him. More than a dozen ministers instigated tens of thousands of people to kneel at the entrance of the southern palace. They said that after your majesty ascended the throne as a man, natural disasters befell every year. They hoped that your majesty would abdicate. In the past few years, there had indeed been more natural disasters than before. When a man ascended the throne, his name was not legitimate, and all the women were suppressed. Feng Yunyan even began to promote male officials. This was simply touching the pie of the interest group. He had been fighting with this group for a long time. Feng Yunyan was silent for a while before coldly saying, "Zhen understands. Let them kneel. I will deal with them tomorrow morning." The waiter retreated. Then, he sat alone in a chair and was in a daze for a long time. Someone was rebelling against him again. "Wei Wei," he called softly. "Yes." He suddenly looked up and saw Wei Weibai lazily leaning against the table. She was still smiling. Feng Yunyan was pleasantly surprised. With trembling hands, he rushed over to hug her. But in the next moment, he only hugged the void. Feng Yunyan was stunned. He looked at the empty room. There was no sign of her. Lovesickness had seeped into his bones. He chuckled, sad and wronged. Then, he slowly walked out of the door and into the imperial court. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 548. He was the only one walking alone in the empty court. He looked up and saw the dragon throne. Suddenly, his eyes lit up with an unimaginable light. Cold and crazy. He ran up quickly and sat on the dragon throne. He put his hands on the armrest and gripped it tightly. She had used her life to exchange for this position. It was her gift to him. So what if everyone in the world rebelled? They all said that men could not ascend the throne. His Weiwei said that he could. Yes, he could. Feng Yunyan said in a hoarse voice, "This is what you gave me. No one can take it away." He only had the country she gave him left. He had nothing else. He had to protect the country she left behind. Feng Yunyan revealed a sad smile. "They all bully me, Weiwei." Those subjects all bullied him. Everyone wanted to pull him down from this position. He racked his brains and trembled with fear. Every single day was very difficult. But I can't die. If I die, the country you gave me will be taken away by others. Feng Yunyan sat alone and silently on the dragon throne, his tears falling silently. Without her to pamper him and protect him. He was so cheap that he was nothing. The sunlight entered the court and shone on his pale and haggard face. He suddenly looked up. The weakness in his eyes disappeared, only leaving behind a black killing intent. Feng Yunyan returned to his palace and put on the emperor's robes. Then, step by step, he walked into the court with an imposing manner. The ministers had already arrived. Some people felt that today's Feng Yunyan seemed a little different. Feng Yunyan slowly sat on the dragon throne. His posture was calm and elegant, and his face was expressionless. A minister said fiercely, "Your Majesty, there is a drought this year. The disaster is disastrous. Outside the south gate, there are already thousands of people kneeling to ask your Majesty to abdicate. They hope that your Majesty will reconsider." Feng Yunyan looked up. A light appeared in his dark eyes, cold and sharp. He curled his lips into a faint smile and swept his gaze over those who opposed him. "Then let's kill them all." From today onwards, he would no longer care about anyone, nor would he take half a step back for anyone. He would let everyone know that those who schemed against him and disobeyed him would all die a horrible death. Because the person who protected him was no longer there. All that was left was this vast expanse of lonely mountains and this empty palace to accompany him. He still had to live to protect her country. In the records of later generations, the first male emperor in history, the Feng clan, killed decisively during his reign. He used torture and tyrannical power. However, he was good at governing the country and was good at recruiting talents. During his rule, the people were safe and sound, and foreign enemies bowed their heads in submission, praising him both internally and externally. The Feng clan had spent their entire lives observing filial piety for the late emperor. They did not change the name of the country and adopted the women of the Bai clan, nurturing them with great care. In the 20th year of his reign, he died of illness on the way to the tomb of the previous emperor. After his death, he was buried with the previous emperor. The woman of the Bai family obeyed his wishes and ascended the throne. He had created a flourishing age. 20 years. He was like a lonely soul that had guarded the boundless land for 20 years. That kind of loneliness slowly seeped into his bones. It was enough to drive anyone crazy. When Yi Yuxuan woke up, it was the first time he was afraid of a dream. And grievance, was it grievance? His heart was sour and astringent, and he couldn't describe what he was feeling. He just wanted to find her, then hug her and tell her that he was very uncomfortable. Weiwei Bai was a little puzzled. Her fingers gently touched his head. "What's wrong with you? Who bullied you? Tell me, I'll help you bully them back, okay?" This kind of Yi Yuxuan made her feel strange, but also a kind of soft helplessness. To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to read on. Com. Chapter 549. She couldn't even bear to speak harshly to him. Maybe it was because he really looked like he was wronged. Bai Changyan looked at Yi Yuxuan and then at his daughter. His lips trembled. "Weiwei, don't be fooled by him. He's the one who bullied you." It was really a case of the guilty party complaining first. A grown man crying and begging for sympathy. Did he think that he would forget his beastly behavior? Bai Weiwei was confused. She wasn't in a vegetative state, she was fishing for life points. Since when did Yi Yuxuan have the time to bully her? Could it be that he drew a turtle on her face as revenge when she was sleeping? Bai Changyan looked at his daughter's pure and innocent face and finally couldn't take it anymore. He felt that he had the obligation to teach her what the beasts in this world looked like. Bai Changyan pointed at Yi Yuxuan and said indignantly, "This beast, he kissed you. I saw it with my own eyes." Wei Wei Bai immediately explained, "You misunderstood, Dad. I kissed him." Bai Changyan didn't hear it. "He even took off your clothes with the intention to do something to you." Wei Wei Bai, "He didn't take it off, I did. I couldn't wait to seduce him." Bai Changyan's face turned red and he completely ignored her words. "He even hugged you and wanted to do something to you." Wei Wei Bai, "Then let's do it. We're already husband and wife. It's time to do it." Bai Changyan hugged his head in grief. "I actually gave my daughter to a man who's worse than a beast." Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "I wanted to do it with him. He just had no choice." Bai Changyan finally reacted. "Wait, what did his daughter just say?" Yi Yuxuan also finally looked up. His expression was indifferent and his eyes were dark and misty. There was a hint of confusion. "I'm not worse than a beast." He heard old Father Bai's condemnation, but he didn't care. But there was a trace of uneasiness in his heart. Would she care? Wei Wei Bai looked at his exquisite face. His eyelashes were stained with tears, and there was a faint look of confusion on his face. Soft and handsome, he could make any woman let down their guard in an instant. At this moment, Wei Wei Bai was bursting with protectiveness. She raised her head and said to her father, "Father, it has always been your daughter who molested others. There is no reason for others to molest me. Look," she said through gritted teeth. Then, she reached out to hold his face and kissed him fiercely. Their tongues intertwined, moist and sweet. Both of them were shocked at the same time. Yi Yuxuan was in a daze as he allowed her to kiss him. Wei Wei Bai hugged his body forcefully and reached out to press down on his hair. The tip of her tongue slid across his lips, causing him to tremble. Yi Yuxuan couldn't help but kiss her back. He wanted to grab more of her breath. More, dispelling the fear and loneliness in his heart. The two of them kissed until it was hard for them to part. They kissed as if they were glued to each other. Old Father Bai staggered and Qin Qiu reached out to support him. "In-law, take care." Old Father Bai's tears flowed. "Daughter, what's wrong with you? Why did you suddenly grow up to molest men?" Qin Qiu sighed and took Old Father Bai to the side. Then, he pulled out a cigarette and handed it to him. The two men with complicated thoughts squatted on the ground and puffed out smoke. Qin Qiu was also uncomfortable. He rubbed his hands together and acted as a matchmaker. "Woo-woo, Yi Yuxuan, this slag. Isn't this very good?" He, a single dog, was abused so painfully and wrongly. Why didn't anyone comfort him? Suddenly, Bai Changyan reached out and patted him on the shoulder. The two of them looked at each other with a sad expression. "My daughter has also grown up." Old Father Bai sighed. Qin Qiu also sighed. "Yes, my family's little Xian has also been enlightened. But why were they not happy at all?" The Chapter 550. 150 life points, full bar, stop fishing. The system took out the leftover Dignity Luxury Super VIP System spicy strips and ate one silently. Then it looked back and saw that the adulterous couple was still kissing each other like glue. Damn, don't they know how many people are in the corridor? Don't they have any shame? The life points were still surging and roaring. The system saw Yi Yuxuan and was totally unprepared. If it wasn't for Wei Wei Bai being unable to accommodate more than 150 life points, it would have been able to make enough money. It could get enough in one go, so it didn't have to risk its life to cross planes to flirt with the big fool Yi Yuxuan. The system sighed. The warehouse is empty. If it continues like this, something will happen sooner or later. Even the side rewards were taken from the trash can in the corner of the warehouse to coax Wei Wei Bai. It couldn't be helped. It didn't dare to take any of the side rewards given by the main system. If it took it, something would definitely happen. The system stopped its wild thoughts and quietly turned back. There was no kiss. It was relieved. Just as it was about to turn around, it heard Yi Yuxuan say softly, "I had a dream." The system exploded and immediately drew a dialogue blocker with its fingers. It blocked Yi Yuxuan's words. Wei Wei Bai was held tightly by Yi Yuxuan. He said lightly, "That dream, what happened to that dream?" Then Bai Wei Wei heard Yi Yuxuan's lips move, but she couldn't hear anything, as if her ears couldn't accept it. She frowned. "What's going on?" She immediately knocked on the system. "Tongzi, I think there's something wrong with my ears. I can't hear what Yi Yuxuan is saying." The system said calmly, "You've transmigrated too much. Your hearing may be left in the plane space. It's okay, it will return to normal later." Wei Wei Bai didn't doubt the system. She said to herself in confusion, Why can't I hear when Yi Yuxuan is talking? The system was scared, worried that she would see something. Then, he switched the blocker to the modifier. Reality changed Yi Yuxuan's words. Wei Wei Bai's ears and eyes suddenly became clear. Yi Yuxuan's indifferent and magnetic voice also sounded. In that dream, I transformed into Ultraman and fought small monsters. I fought a total of 33 small monsters. I even transformed into a flower fairy and kept spinning around. Wei Wei Bai, this dream is too magical. And Yi Yuxuan actually said it very seriously. What the system heard was, in my dreams, you left me time and time again, never stopping. This time, you gave me your empire, it was melancholy. Sooner or later, it would not be able to hide it anymore. Unless Wei Wei Bai had enough HP and didn't stay in the real world for too long to avoid Yi Yuxuan. After Yi Yuxuan finished speaking, he stared at her blankly, trying to see a trace of throbbing in her eyes. After Wei Wei Bai finished listening to his dream of a flower fairy spinning around, she was speechless for a moment. He said softly, "Have you ever had this kind of dream?" She had been sleeping and waking up, and the time of her dream matched with his. That was why he personally guarded her and didn't let the hospital do anything excessive to her body. He was worried that she was actually having the same dream as him. Wei Wei Bai looked at his expectant eyes and couldn't help but cough lightly. Your dream is very colorful. I have never had this kind of dream. Who would dream of Ultraman fighting small monsters and a flower fairy spinning around? It's not like she didn't grow up. Yi Yuxuan fell silent and lowered his head. He was filled with the urge to tell her. It was all gone. She had never dreamed of him. If that was really their previous life, then he would be the only one to sink. Wei Wei Bai looked at him like a big dog that had been hit by a blow. He was so cute and cute. Chapter 551. She did not know why, but her heart was touched. There was a strange feeling of depression. She could not help but rub his hair and comforted him. You might have this dream in the future, so don't be sad. She thought that Yi Yuxuan was a robot with facial paralysis. She did not expect him to be a young man with a childish heart who did not grow up. This contrast instantly narrowed the distance between the two of them. Yes, she also liked Ultraman Flower Fairy SpongeBob SquarePants. They had the same interests and hobbies, so it was not difficult for them to get along. Yi Yuxuan's neatly combed short hair was ruffled by her. He did not move, but his lips were pursed. There was a clear light in his deep black eyes. Suddenly, he sighed softly and reached out to press her head against his shoulder. His fingers were placed on her delicate neck, without a trace of desire, and there was a trace of sadness in his dark eyes. It's good not to dream. In her dreams, she never had a good ending. In every life, she died because of those men. It was better not to dream like this. Wei Wei Bai straightened her neck, and her smile was a little stiff. She felt that Yi Yuxuan's mood was not right. Was he this passionate before? The system could not help but interrupt. Your excitement level is decreasing. If you continue to hug him, you will need to reverse feed your life points. Wei Wei Bai's breath caught, and she just remembered this. She only thought that Yi Yuxuan was her life. She forgot that he was also very good at taking lives. Wei Wei Bai's smile was a little stiff, and she slowly reached out her hand, as if she was afraid of disturbing him, and pushed him away inch by inch. Yi Yuxuan did not change his position, and she could not push him away no matter how hard she tried. The system said, "Your excitement level has stabilized, just a little more and you will start to reverse feed." Wei Wei Bai was a little anxious, and her voice could not help but soften. Yi Yuxuan. Without entering the strategy mode, her unfamiliar attitude towards him was revealed. She called his full name and surname. Yi Yuxuan paused for a moment before releasing her slightly. Wei Wei Bai tensed up? After all, life points were hard to come by. She had traveled through so many planes, and to be honest, she was tired. Every single one of the planes was laborious and exhausting. Every single time, they risked their lives to do the work. Only now did he manage to get a few months' worth of HP from Yi Yuxuan. She couldn't wait to carefully protect her life for the next few months. She couldn't bear to lose even a single day. But just a moment ago, she was still hugging and nibbling on him affectionately. Now, she turned hostile and kicked him away. Wasn't this telling others that she had ulterior motives? She could only persevere and soften her voice. "You're hurting me." She unconsciously raised her last syllable with a hint of coquettishness. Yi Yuxuan's heart, which had started to waver again after being coaxed by her. He couldn't bear to let go of his fingers, but slowly, he finally let go of her. The ripples in his heart continued to expand. A feeling similar to dissatisfaction made him feel a little lost and silent. Towards unfamiliar feelings. No matter how solid his theoretical knowledge was, when he really faced those legendary joys, sorrows, doubts, and dissatisfaction, he was still at a loss. Everything was so fresh that he couldn't handle it. In the past, he was clearly the best at rationalizing anything into what he wanted, and then perfectly completing it. Only in front of Wei Wei Bai, he was like a newborn baby. It was as if a smile from her could make him hold her carefully and not bear to break even a little bit of her. Those painful experiences in his dreams that were separated by glass. It made him want to hold on to her even more tightly. Everything was like a prediction. Those men kept losing her. And would he lose her in the next second too? Chapter 552. Yi Yuxuan suddenly reached out and clasped her fingers tightly, ignoring her surprised expression. He was silent for a moment, but he didn't know how to organize his words to express his thoughts correctly. Wei Wei Bai's brain finally became active. Tongzi, don't you think Yi Yuxuan is really abnormal? The frightened system immediately denied it 3 times. No, he's very normal. Wei Wei Bai, why is it so suspicious? She looks like a big fool who's easy to fool? Oh, this was an extremely suspicious answer. The system immediately raised its guard. It racked its brains. Why don't you think about it? You grabbed someone when you woke up and gnawed on him. After that, you even took off your clothes and planned to force yourself on him. Yi Yuxuan might be very traditional. If you treat him like this, he can only marry you. After all, his innocence has been tarnished by you. Wei Wei Bai, the system was right, but why did it sound like she was like a scumbag, a beast, and a rapist? Wei Wei Bai seriously thought about it. In the plains she passed through those days, it seemed that she was indeed a scumbag. Then she looked deeply at Yi Yuxuan. If this man was too traditional, what would she do in the future? A good man and a scumbag woman would not have a good ending. If she accidentally became a scumbag in the future, what would she do if Yi Yuxuan hanged himself? Wei Wei Bai said to the system, why don't we go through a few more planes and get more life points? Then I'll let Yi Yuxuan go. An honest person couldn't afford to play. After all, he was the man who gave her life points, so she wouldn't hold him back. System, you never let him go. The system felt that it would have cataracts sooner or later. It reminded, the feedback has begun, 150, Wei Wei Bai made a prompt decision. Activate the vegetative state gift pack, immediately, go through the plains immediately. Now that she shook off Yi Yuxuan's hand, she couldn't run even if she tried. This broken body couldn't withstand intense exercise. She could only transmigrate first. The system nodded. Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to reveal a soft and sweet smile to Yi Yuxuan. I want you to pass on a message. Yi Yuxuan calmly and attentively stared at her, this kind of indifferent but serious expression. Wei Wei Bai actually saw a sense of anticipation. She looked into his eyes. Tell my father that I love him and that he doesn't have to worry about me. Activating newbie gift pack. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 3 days of vegetative state life. After Wei Wei Bai finished speaking, she closed her eyes and the sound of steady breathing could be heard. Yi Yuxuan held her hand in a daze. She was still here, but why did he feel like he had lost her? You love him? There was a hint of disappointment in his tone. Even the light in his eyes dimmed. It was as if he had lost his support all of a sudden. Yi Yuxuan was silent for a while before she got up and pushed her forward. When he came around the corner, Qin Qiu and Bai Changyan were like 2 migrant workers, squatting in the corner smoking, and there was a big no-smoking sign above their heads. Bai Changyan thought of his daughter, who had become a tomboy who would molest others, and he felt sad. This kind of psychological journey of his daughter growing up to become a female hooligan made him constantly reflect on his teaching methods. Qin Qiu also drooped his eyebrows and sighed. He was thinking about when Yi Yuxuan and Wei Wei Bai hooked up, there was no warning at all. Yi Yuxuan's face was cold, his eyes gloomy and dark as he glanced at Bai Changyan. His voice was flat. Father-in-law. The cigarette in Bai Changyan's hand shook. Who's your father-in-law? Can you not call him that? Download T. Chapter 553. Yi Yuxuan raised his eyelids and looked at Bai Changyan from head to toe. That indifferent, and faintly mocking gaze swept past him just like that. Bai Changyan was only naive and sweet to his daughter, but he was usually very sensitive. Yi Yuxuan's expression, eyes, and attitude. Was this contempt, disdain, and looking down on him? His daughter hadn't married yet, but this son-in-law was already looking down on his father-in-law. Yi Yuxuan, this guy, simply looked like a bad guy who abused his wife and cheated on her. Bai Changyan was just about to say something. Yi Yuxuan lowered his head and glanced at the cigarette butts under their feet. His tone was very calm. Smoking is prohibited here. You're so old and still don't understand. Bai Changyan, Yi Yuxuan, Wei Wei asked me to say something to her father. Bai Changyan looked at his daughter who was asleep in the wheelchair and got excited. What do you want to say? Yi Yuxuan was silent for a moment, and that cold gaze appeared again. Are you Wei Wei's father? Bai Changyan looked sluggish. Isn't this nonsense? If he wasn't Wei Wei's father, then could he be her mother? Yi Yuxuan's voice was indifferent and sharp. I don't think you and Wei Wei have any similarities. She's such a lovely and beautiful girl, she shouldn't have such an ugly and old father like you. Bai Changyan, Yi Yuxuan turned his head and looked at Qin Qiu coldly. Uncle Qin, help him do a paternity test. Qin Qiu almost choked himself to death with a puff of smoke. Fuck, what's wrong with this? You want to rob someone else's daughter and deny that he's their father. Yi Yuxuan pushed Wei Wei Bai away slowly, his eyes terrifyingly cold. Tell her father that she loves him. Her father isn't necessarily Bai Changyan. Yi Yuxuan was completely unaware that her dark and petty behavior was simply engraved with the word jealousy. He just didn't like the way she said that she loved others. Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu, who were still squatting in the corner, looked at each other for a while. Bai Changyan finally exploded. He grabbed Qin Qiu's neck and roared. What is this little brat doing? What do you mean I'm old and ugly? Am I very old and ugly? I'm clearly a carbon copy of my daughter. Qin Qiu was pinched until his eyes turned white. Who did he provoke? Why did she have to pinch him? More importantly, you have to be made from the same mold as your daughter. Are you trying to scare me to death? When Wei Wei Bai woke up this time, her head hurt more than ever before, and she felt nauseous. Her chest felt tight, and she could smell cheap perfume every time she breathed. This perfume was so strong that it could make one faint. It was a mosquito-repellent incense that could drive away mosquitoes. She heard someone shouting and singing noisily, and someone beside her was pushing her. Hey, beauty, why don't you play? Wei Wei Bai reluctantly opened her eyes, and an ugly round face appeared. Her eyes, which were accustomed to beauty, widened in fright. Almost without thinking, she lifted her 10-centimeter high heels and kicked out. That pancake face cried out and fell down. She covered her head and saw that she was in a KTV box. There were 5 men and 4 women in her box. At first glance, the men didn't look like decent goods, and the women, wearing cheap low-cut sequin dresses and heavy makeup, they all looked the same. At first glance, they were all KTV girls. When the men saw that their brother was kicked, they immediately threw down the microphone. Bitch, why are you pretending to be virtuous and virtuous? Bai Weiwei had developed a reflexive avoidance instinct in the face of danger. She almost didn't think much, turned around and ran out. Crossover system, Adonis, come over here. Chapter 554. The men behind her rushed over. Don't run, stinky woman. Wei Wei Bai had not received the memory yet, and the system seemed to have delayed its descent, silent. She could only rely on her own 2 legs to quickly run out of the room. Outside the private room, there was a bar and a dance hall. A group of people were dancing wildly. The deafening sound of the DJ hitting the disc could be heard. Wei Wei Bai was already drunk, and this scene made her head hurt even more. Wei Wei Bai. Amidst the rumbling music, a voice as clear as a spring rang in her ears. Wei Wei Bai trembled, frowning as she turned around. But she saw a slender figure almost touching her from behind. It was a young man, wearing a black coat with a loose hood on his head. He was wearing a black mask, and the mask was close to his face, but his perfect facial features could be seen. He looked at Wei Wei Bai coldly. His cold and sharp eyes were so clear that it was like someone had crushed a handful of stars and scattered them into them. Wei Wei Bai looked at him suspiciously and vigilantly. The man's eyes flashed with anger, and he looked at her with disgust. Come with me for a moment? After saying that, he turned around and left. He looked like he was eager to cut ties with her. This mission is to obtain He Nanqi's love. Target, He Nanqi. Completion, 0, time, 6 months. Ding, the male lead's favorability is -20. It was only -20. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, so you were so hungry that you disconnected? The system was silent for a moment. No, I ate too much. The spicy strips given by the main system were too full, I couldn't walk. Wei Wei Bai said, then you don't need to eat in this world. The system said, I just digested it, so I'm hungry again. The system's shamelessness was getting closer and closer to her. When the memory was transferred, she was already dizzy. This time, the pain intensified. She twisted her high heels and staggered forward a few steps, directly bumping into the man in front of her. She knocked her head against his hard back and felt a buzzing sound in her head. She couldn't help but grit her teeth and complain to the system, "This figure isn't bad. He's muscular and looks thin in clothes." The system couldn't respond in time. The man in front of her stopped in his tracks. He suddenly turned around, grabbed her clothes with one hand, and pushed her away calmly. Wei Weibai was pushed back a few steps by his strength and almost fell. However, the man glanced at her indifferently. A few strands of hair fell under his eyes. His deep and dense eyes were filled with coldness that couldn't be melted. "Don't touch me, it's dirty." Wei Weibai raised her head awkwardly. She had already received the memories, so she roughly knew how to face him. She pursed her lips and her eyes revealed a trace of cowardice. She said with some embarrassment, "Nanchi?" The man's exquisite and perfect eyebrows furrowed tightly, bringing with them traces of ruthlessness and irritation. "Are you leaving or not? My brother is still waiting for you." After speaking, Nanchi didn't care about Wei Weibai and strode forward. Wei Weibai looked at his tall and straight back and couldn't help but sigh. "This plane is worse than a beast." The system said earnestly, "The siblings have already survived. Sister-in-law and brother-in-law are actually not that hardcore." Hinanchi was the brother-in-law of her current body. The original owner was married to Hinanchi's older brother, Dongling. In this marriage, it was inappropriate for the two of them to be of equal status. The original owner, Wei Weibai, was born in the countryside. She had a younger brother at home. Her parents were eccentric people who were good at calculating and preferred boys over girls. They squeezed Wei Weibai from a young age. When she was in junior high school, she dropped out to work to support her younger brother. Chapter 555. She was pretty. After she turned 18, she started working in a bar and sent home all the money she earned. That was when Dongling chased after her. He was young, rich, gentle, and humorous. He coaxed her until she was in a daze. Dongling later proposed and Wei Weibai agreed. After all, she had lacked love since she was young. She would rush over to anyone who gave her some warmth. But what happened next was beyond Wei Weibai's expectations. The He family was a wealthy family. He married a bar girl who was not presentable. The two elders of the He family were furious. They used all kinds of methods to suppress Wei Weibai and tried to break up her marriage with Dongling. All kinds of humiliation and framing made her feel at a loss and seek Dongling's help. But what was even more ridiculous was that Dongling didn't like Wei Weibai at all. He married her just to cover up his abnormal love. He liked his father's mistress, the woman he had to call his stepmother. And he married Wei Weibai to be a target. They had been married for so long, but he didn't even touch her. So he couldn't wait for more people to bully Wei Weibai. That way, he could cover up his dirty affair with his stepmother. Later, Wei Weibai was framed for stealing jewelry and was chased out of the He family. Under the He family's suppression, she was poor and could only return to the bar to be a hostess. At this time, Dongling still pretended to be in deep love and pain. He lied to everyone. He even got into a car accident on the way to have an affair with his stepmother and became a vegetable in bed. Everyone thought that Dongling had sneaked out to find Wei Weibai. The He family hated Wei Weibai even more. After reading these memories, Wei Weibai only had one sentence. The original owner of the body, Wei Weibai, had fucked up the dog and abused the cat. Were the He family's lunatics the only ones who caught her and bit her? She didn't know if it was because the He family was evil or something. After suppressing Wei Weibai, the He family fell into a political crisis and went bankrupt. Now, the He family's two elders were fleeing abroad. Only Dongling, who was in a vegetative state, was still waiting to die in the hospital. There was also Dongling's younger brother, Hinanchi. When Wei Weibai saw this, she simply clapped her hands in joy. There was true love in the world, and there was true love in the world. These lunatics should be beggars on the streets. Hinanchi walked in front of a low-key, cheap car. After opening the door, he stood by the door and looked at Wei Weibai coldly. He hated noisy places very much. The noisy environment of the bar and the unrestrained behavior of the bar girls made his impression of his sister-in-law, Wei Weibai, plummet. Wei Weibai seemed to be drunk as she staggered. Her thin high heels tapped on the ground, and her two white and thin calves were even more eye-catching than the street lamps. Her hair was a mess, her makeup was heavy, and her perfume was pungent. But there was a clear light in her hazy eyes. Her large eyes were exceptionally beautiful. Hinanchi lowered his eyes, cold and emotionless. When he saw her walk in front of him, he said impatiently, "Get in the car." Wei Weibai got into the passenger's seat. He walked to the other side and got into the driver's seat. The car smoothly drove out. Wei Wei Bai suddenly reacted. Does Dong Ling want to see me? Dong Ling was a scumbag and black, so he hid it very well. The original Wei Wei Bai was also stupid and didn't know that her husband married her with ulterior motives. Wei Wei Bai was very good at maintaining this image. She immediately broke into a surprised smile. Her face with heavy makeup revealed an innocent and charming expression like a little girl. Then she hurriedly took out her small bag and took out her makeup remover. Dong Ling doesn't like too much makeup. I can't see him like this. Hinanchi didn't take off his mask as he looked at the traffic in front of him with gloomy eyes. Chapter 556. He didn't care about Wei Wei Bai's excitement. He wasn't at home all year round, so he was very unfamiliar with Wei Wei Bai. He hated her a lot. It was one thing for a bar girl from the countryside to hook up with his brother. After marrying into his family, she even turned his family upside down. At that time, he received calls from his parents every day when he was outside, and every call was to scold Wei Wei Bai. Moreover, his brother didn't explain. So Hinanchi had a preconceived notion that this sister-in-law wasn't a good person. Not to mention, even if she left the He family, she could still do other jobs. She actually came to drink with him. His impression of her became even worse. Nanchi, look at me. Have I removed all my makeup? Wei Wei Bai couldn't seem to find a mirror. She held the makeup remover in her hand and was at a loss. Hinanchi glanced sideways, his eyes cold. But he suddenly froze. After Wei Wei Bai's heavy makeup was removed, her clean and tender skin was revealed. Occasionally, the street lights shone in, revealing her delicate and innocent face. She was so beautiful that no one could nitpick. Even Hinanchi, who had seen many beautiful women in the entertainment industry. He was stunned for a moment. Wei Wei Bai seemed a little confused. She bit her red lips and looked at him a little embarrassedly. Haven't you removed all your makeup? Her gaze was very clear, and her words were neither fast nor slow. They were gentle and had a hint of sweetness. Hinanchi thought that she was the kind of woman who looked old. The result was so unexpected that he couldn't accept it for a moment. He looked away and continued to focus on driving. He didn't answer Wei Wei Bai. But that cold and disdainful gaze was a little less. When they arrived at the hospital, Wei Wei Bai was a little confused. Why is Dongling in the hospital? The original owner didn't know that Dongling had a car accident, nor did she know that the He family was bankrupt. Hinanchi stopped in his tracks. He had his back to her and lowered his head, his entire person exuding a gloomy and violent aura. He got into a car accident while looking for you. This was the reason why he could not forgive Wei Wei Bai. If it wasn't for her, her brother wouldn't have become a vegetable. Wei Wei Bai, that scumbag He Dong got retribution for whoring his second mother. What does it have to do with her? If it weren't for this plane, the target of her strategy would be too sensitive. She had already rolled up her sleeves and legated He Dong's scum. Then, she hung up the He family's two elders and beat them to vent her anger. But if she did that, Hinanchi would probably fight it out with her. Wei Wei Bai had no choice but to unwillingly reveal a sorrowful expression and exaggeratedly said, "What did you say? Dong Ling became a vegetable because of me?" Hinanchi said, "He's in the ward in front." As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Wei Bai rushed over like a gust of wind and opened the door of the ward. Then, she saw the figure of a man lying on the bed. After confirming that it was He Dongling, she gathered her chi in her dantian and stomped on the ground. Her entire body rushed over and landed heavily on his body. Although He Dongling was in a vegetative state, he still reacted. He was pressed down by her until his expression twisted and his tongue stuck out. Wei Wei Bai immediately burst into tears. She pressed down on He Dongling. "Dongling, what's wrong with you? Wake up." Vegetative He Dongling. He felt like he was going to die. Hinanchi, who had just entered the ward, took off his mask and saw Wei Wei Bai's incomparably sorrowful appearance. His heart couldn't help but relax. Although this woman's character was rotten, at least she still had some sincerity towards his brother. At least she wasn't completely rotten. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -15. Chapter 557. Wei Wei Bai couldn't crush He Cinder to death. She only hated herself for being light and having a perfect figure. She didn't have any extra fat to punish this blind and slanted world's #1 scumbag. Behind her, Hinanchi's clear and particularly recognizable voice suddenly came from behind her. There was a hint of impatience and indifference. "I've brought the divorce agreement. Hurry up and sign it." The purpose of looking for Wei Wei Bai today was to get the divorce agreement. This divorce agreement had been prepared long before Wei Wei Bai entered the He family. If Wei Wei Bai hadn't insisted on getting a divorce, this divorce agreement had taken effect long ago. Hinanchi saw that Wei Wei Bai had stopped crying. Her back was facing him. Even if she was wearing a cheap dress, her slender and thin back didn't look ugly. He threw the agreement in his hand on the table. Sign it. The agreement will give you a property. Don't think it's too little. Now, all of the He family's assets have been frozen. This storm. The He family had become a rat crossing the street that everyone hated. He had always been in the entertainment industry. He didn't know that his family was already full of holes. In addition, this time, he recklessly interfered in the political circle. He basically couldn't make a comeback. Hinanchi was also banned. He originally thought that he had so many fans, a manager, and a company to protect him. In the end, when the matter came out, the company immediately abandoned him. His fans spurned him. His manager turned hostile. Overnight, he saw clearly that people were sinister. Without the He family, he was trash. No, without money and power, he was trash. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. Her fingers nervously grabbed He dangling. Her voice trembled with helplessness. I'm not getting a divorce. Hinanchi looked at her coldly. His cold eyes were like a firm and calm ice field, without a trace of emotion. My family has no money. My brother is now in a vegetative state. Do you think you can still be Mrs. He and enjoy all the glory and wealth? During this period of indifference, he clearly saw how disgusting the human heart was. Wei Wei Bai, a bar girl, had fallen to the point of being an escort. How could such a woman dream of grabbing his brother and soaring into the sky? Hinanchi's thin lips curled up coldly, as if he was mocking her. He wanted to shatter her dreams of riches and honor with every word. Do you know how much the hospital bill is for my brother to lie here every day? When the money in the account is gone, as his wife, you have to feed him even if you have to pick up garbage. There was still enough money for He Dongling's medical expenses. However, he was deliberately scaring Wei Wei Bai so that she would back off. Wei Wei Bai's voice was soft but firm. I won't leave your brother. Hinanchi was already in a bad mood. When he didn't get the reaction he expected, his voice immediately turned cold. Are you still dreaming that my family can give you anything? Stop dreaming. The He family is bankrupt. If you buy any newspaper now, it will say that my family is bankrupt. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head, her back facing Hinanchi. She reached out and gently tucked He Dongling in, her long hair falling over her shoulders. Hinanchi only saw a thin slit at the waist of her dress when she bent over. This kind of dress with a slit at the back was very scheming. It was as if she was trying to seduce someone. He glanced over indifferently and saw that her waist was revealing a bit of fair skin. It was delicate and cute. Hinanchi couldn't help but feel gloomy. His tone became heavier. Are you deaf? If you don't get a divorce, you'll have to help pay off the huge debt of the He family. How many years will it take you to pay back the dirty money from the escort? Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 558. Wei Wei Bai adjusted the blanket for He Dongling before turning around slowly. She saw Hinanchi standing by the table. He took off his mask and threw it on the table. He looked unusually young. He looked like a teenager with a pair of dark eyes that had a cold light in them. He had one hand in his trouser pocket. He looked delicate and thin, but his aura was gloomy and sharp. He gave people a feeling that he was not easy to get along with. When he saw Wei Wei Bai turn around, his gaze turned colder. He was as vigilant as a wolf cub. Wei Wei Bai did not say anything. Instead, she stared at him motionlessly. Her gaze was even more oppressive than his. Hinanchi frowned and stared back at her. As he stared, his gaze involuntarily landed on the tip of her nose, her moist eyes, and her trembling lips. Why was this woman so aggrieved? She had turned his family upside down and now she was acting pitiful. He had told her that his family was bankrupt. Did she not believe him? Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before she finally walked in front of him. Hinanchi looked at her indifferently. However, she suddenly became tough. Call me sister-in-law. Hinanchi. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and stared at him fiercely. I'm your sister-in-law. Don't you know how to be polite? Hinanchi was annoyed. You don't want to give me face, slap. She suddenly raised her hand and slapped his face with her soft palm without hesitation. Hinanchi tilted his head. His mind was a little confused. This woman dared to hit him. He was never one to be taken advantage of, not to mention that he was in an unusually bad mood now. He raised his hand to return the slap without thinking. However, just as he raised his hand in the air, Hinanchi froze. Wei Wei Bai bit her lip hard. Her almond-shaped eyes were full of tears. Under the light, her teary eyes were shockingly bright. They were like a burning fire that could almost burn people. She emphasized each and every word. Her tone was filled with grievance, but she was incomparably strong. I am your sister-in-law, and your brother is my husband. I don't care if your family is rich or not, if your family is ruined or prosperous, whether your brother is healthy or disabled, I will not give up on him. Hinanchi's breathing stagnated. He could not look at her directly and could not help but look away. But at the same time, he felt like he had admitted defeat. Why was he suddenly being led by this woman? Hinanchi said stubbornly, "Do you think I will believe a woman who works as an escort in a bar?" After he finished speaking, he suddenly shut his mouth. Sure enough, she saw Wei Wei Bai's head drooping down like a withered flower. Hinanchi was upset and said coldly, "Forget it, I'm too lazy to care about your trivial matters. You'll regret it if you don't divorce me." After saying that, he put on his mask and walked out. When he reached the door, he couldn't help but turn back. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai sitting by the bed. Her eyes were filled with sadness as she gently held her brother's hand. She turned her face to the side and lowered her eyes. Her fair neck was as beautiful as jade under the light. Hinanchi suddenly suspected that the woman who loved vanity in his parents' mouths. Was it really Wei Wei Bai? During this period of time, many people knew about his family situation, even his good friends. They all avoided him in fear. This made Hinanchi's heart turn cold. But why did Wei Wei Bai, who should have run faster than anyone else? But she insisted on staying. Hinanchi slowed down his footsteps and heard Wei Wei Bai whisper to Dongling, "Dongling, wake up, didn't you say you wanted to go stargazing with me?" He tilted his head in silence. His beautiful and gloomy eyes were half closed. No one knew what he was thinking. Then he lifted his feet and left. Ding, Hinanchi's favorability is at -10. Chapter 559. Most of his dislike for Wei Wei Bai came from the evaluation of his family members. Once it was discovered that the evaluation did not match, the favorability would naturally increase. With her back facing the door, Wei Wei Bai continued to speak to the plant slag affectionately. "That year when you were chasing me, you talked to me about the constellations. You told me that the stars in the sky were as beautiful as me." The system covered its ears. Stop, stop, stop. Stop being so awkward. Your cheesy words of love are making my soul fly out of my body. Wei Wei Bai, my son left? The system asked. Your son? Wei Wei Bai, the eldest sister-in-law is like a mother. There are no elders in the family, and I'm the only one left. I'm the only one left. I'm the only one who's so beautiful that it's tempting to commit a crime. I'll treat Nan Nan as my own son. System, she's like a mother, like a mother, like a mother. She's so beautiful that she's tempting to commit crimes? Why does it feel like she's even more hardcore than a sibling love story? Where did the host's head come from? It was such a solemn and proper system that it had never inculcated such thoughts in her. Wei Wei Bai shook off Dongling's hand and calmly wiped her hands on his blanket. I really want to give Cinder he some water and see if a vegetative person can photosynthesize and grow shoulder to shoulder with the stars in the sky. He had seen so many scumbags in so many planes. Only this scum in a vegetative state was different from the rest. She really wanted to kick his face a few times. The system said, "Isn't he still useful? He is the bridge between you and your son." Wei Wei Bai nodded. That's true. But what about my plain reward? Why is it that every time I don't remind you, you always want to take it all for yourself? The system was shocked and quickly ran to the trash can in the corner. He turned it over and over again. From a pile of junk, he finally found a reward that was barely usable. He hated himself for being so frugal when he was rich in the past. He couldn't bear to throw away things that were too good. As a result, he couldn't find anything expensive even if he went through the trash. Fortunately, Wei Wei Bai didn't know much. If she knew, the host of Another Time and Space would get a lot of rewards. Why didn't he stuff it into the trash can and kick it? Host, please accept the side reward. You will have a singing diva. You smile so sweetly. You are the best at singing. Wei Wei Bai, what do I need this for? Do you get a few extra coins for busking? System, it's been rummaging through the trash can, but it's still being despised. Wei Wei Bai, forget it, it's better than nothing. Hinanchi had a splitting headache. He didn't dare to surf the internet, check Weibo, or even use WeChat. It was full of negative comments about him. Things like him suppressing newcomers, acting like a big shot in the company, and bullying others because of his family's power and influence. Also, the songs that he composed were already popular overseas. Furthermore, he had been nominated for an international award and was about to reach another peak in his career. In the end, because the He family had been suppressed, everyone had unscrupulously taken advantage of his popularity and poured dirty water on him. As a result, his reputation was tarnished, and the foreign judges directly removed his song that was most likely to win an award. Now, scolding Hinanchi had become a political mission for the entertainment industry. Anyone who came to step on him could take advantage of his popularity. Whether it was true or not, no one cared. Suddenly, his phone rang. Hinanchi opened his eyes in a daze, his chest tight. He looked at the phone that kept ringing and hesitated for a moment before answering. It was his manager's voice. "Don't blame me, Nanchi. Now, anyone who provokes your family will be suppressed." The people that the He family has provoked now are people that no one dares to provoke. Hinanchi's eyes turned cold. "Did you call just to tell me this nonsense?" "Yes, no one dared to provoke him, so everyone came to step on him?" His manager hesitated for a moment before finally saying, "Don't go out these days. Someone is spreading rumors about you taking drugs. You're finished." Chapter 560. Hinanchi stared at his phone in a daze until his manager hung up. Then, he connected to the internet and went to Weibo to take a look. Hinanchi has been taking drugs for at least a few years. Everyone in the company knows. He didn't take drugs. Who dares to say? If his family hadn't collapsed, he would have done whatever he wanted. Apart from his cold personality, he had never bullied others. He's so skinny because he took drugs. This rumor is true. The comments were accompanied by photos of him staying up too late and looking haggard. They were wantonly distorting and smearing his reputation. And it was all celebrities like him who were slandering him. Hinanchi knew that he couldn't clear his name. If the He family was at its peak, he wouldn't have been afraid at all. No dirty water could be thrown at him. But now, the He family had collapsed. Once the image of him taking drugs was established, no matter how talented he was, he couldn't climb up. Hinanchi got out of bed. With a pale face, he walked downstairs with a hostile aura. He poured himself a glass of water. His fingers kept trembling. He tried twice but couldn't drink it. Suddenly, he raised his hand and smashed the glass on the ground. Then, as if he had exploded, he smashed the entire living room with a cold face. When Wei Weibai opened the door with the key under the doormat, she saw Hinanchi standing in a pile of junk, full of violent aura. His thick eyelashes were slightly lowered, and his dark eyes were terrifyingly cold. "Get lost." Wei Weibai stood at the door and hesitated. Then, she ignored Hinanchi's furious look and walked in with big and small bags. She walked past him lightly. She put the things in the kitchen. Then, she put on gloves, took out cleaning tools, and started to clean the living room silently. Hinanchi's fingers turned white from clenching. He looked coldly at Wei Weibai who was cleaning and suddenly snorted mockingly. "Pretentious." Then, he turned around and went to take a shower. When he came back from the shower, he found that the living room was almost cleaned. Sounds came from the kitchen. Hinanchi was about to take out his keys and leave the house, even if his impression of Wei Weibai had changed. But he still didn't like her. When he reached the door, he stopped in his tracks. Thinking about how he would be found out when he went out, he was a scumbag drug addict that everyone wanted to beat. He would probably be drowned by the spittle of others. Hinanchi suppressed his anger and sat back down on the sofa to sulk alone. Suddenly, a pair of snow-white slender hands carefully placed a bowl of noodle soup in front of him. "You didn't eat breakfast, right? I cooked you a bowl of noodles." Hinanchi had just finished showering and his hair was still wet. His black hair fell on his cheeks and set off his deep black eyes. There was a kind of coldness that kept people 1,000 miles away. Wei Weibai said softly, "You eat some." Hinanchi impatiently lay on the sofa and looked up lazily. He said sarcastically, "It tastes so bad. Only a pig would eat it." Wei Weibai was silent for a moment. She put down the noodles and turned to leave. "Forget it if you don't want to eat." Then she continued to clean up the living room. There was still some unfinished work. She said calmly as she tidied up, "I believe you." Hinanchi's eyelashes trembled and he didn't say anything. Wei Weibai threw the broken things into the cardboard box. "Those people on the internet are slandering you. Don't be angry. It's not worth it." Hinanchi's sarcastic smile froze. He slowly turned cold. "How do you know it's not true? Maybe I really do take drugs." Wei Weibai turned back. Her eyes were clear and her voice was soft. But it was filled with incomparable confidence. "You won't. You value your fans more than anyone else. You won't ruin your voice." Taking drugs, drinking, and smoking could all ruin a singer's talent. Hinanchi's eyes were gloomy and filled with ruthlessness. Do you think I'll recognize you as my sister-in-law just because you say that? Wei Weibai was indifferent. Instead, she revealed a loving smile. Whether you recognize me or not, I'm still your sister-in-law. Hinanchi's eyebrows jumped and he snorted. Then he picked up the bowl as if nothing had happened and started to eat the noodles. The dense steam made his eyes a little wet. He had been attacked and slandered for so long. He had gone from a proud son of heaven to a rat that everyone wanted to beat. This bowl of noodles was the first time he had experienced kindness. Wei Weibai suddenly asked, "Is it good?" Hinanchi's face darkened. "It tastes terrible?" Ding, the male lead's affection has increased to 0. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the button at the bottom to record this reading. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.